Aigu, this boy. Song Dae-woong knew that his son was in trouble again. Hearing the sound of something shattering, he ran over to see what had happened. As expected, his son, Song Woo-moon, had failed at washing dishes and broken yet another bowl. "You!" shouted Dae-woong, the bulky owner of Dongpyeong-in, as he dashed across the room with a broom in his hands. One of the customers, Mr. Roh, watched in excitement. Such speed and precision, he moves as if he was a Mura master, Mr. Roh thought to himself. "Ouch! Daddy!" Woo-moon exclaimed. He was fidgeting restlessly as he stared at the broken bowl with a blank gaze. The moment his father rushed into the room, his legs gave out, and he put his hands up, as if to protect his head. "Kid, you're such a disgrace. You're already 20, yet you still can't wash dishes properly." Woo-moon was Dae-woong's eldest son, and also a fool. He would always walk around with his mouth agape and a blank expression on his face. From a very young age, he had been exceptionally clever, to the surprise of many. However, as he grew up, problems left behind by minor illnesses that he had caught over the years had accumulated in him, resulting in a poor constitution. As a result, he had grown meek and resigned. Nevertheless, his intelligence had not dimmed in the slightest. However, from a certain point onward, he had suddenly become healthier, while his mind had actually declined. In the end, he had become the way he was now, a healthy and strong fool. It's all because of that damn fake immortal. An old sage had visited the inn when Woo-moon was 10. Dae-woong strongly believed that his son had become a fool due to that incident. "It hurts. Daddy, stop. Stop, you pathetic idiot, imbecile, a disgrace to the family. Even if you can't match up to your younger brother, you should still be better than the boy next door who wets his bed. But look at what you're doing. You can't even wash the dishes properly. You're better off dead. Just die already." Woo-moon couldn't endure the beating and ran out of the kitchen, only to crash into something on the way out. Woo-moon had crashed into the table occupied by Mr. Roh and his son and flipped it over. Woo-moon. "What the hell?" Mr. Roh burst into anger. He was the owner of the cloth shop on the streets. The bowl of noodles he had been enjoying was now on his head, with strands of noodles peeking out from under the bowl. His young son couldn't help but explode into a fit of laughter upon seeing his comical appearance. "Oh no, I'm so sorry, Mr. Roh. You know how my son is. Please calm down. I'll bring you another bowl of noodles." Dae-woong panicked and tried to pacify Mr. Roh. Meanwhile, Woo-moon continued on his escape route, but stopped abruptly at the inn door. Woo-moon broke into a silly smile as he stared at the landscape painting hanging on the wall. The author of the painting was the same person whom Dae-woong had been cursing daily for being a scammer and a fake sage. No matter what Woo-moon was doing, the moment his eyes fell on the landscape painting, he would become mesmerized by it. After barely soothing Mr. Roh's anger and cleaning up the mess, Dae-woong begrudgingly added a few more slices of meat to the new bowls of noodles and brought them to Mr. Roh and his son. His attention then shifted to his son, who was standing at the inn entrance like an idiot and staring at the sickening landscape painting again. Infuriated, Dae-woong grabbed the chopsticks holder from the nearest table and threw it at Woo-moon. "I don't want to see you. Get out, bastard." Woo-moon came back to his senses when the object flying at him made contact with his head. He ran out furiously, without looking at the path ahead, and in a bad streak of luck, he almost crashed into a woman on his way. "Watch your path, kid." A warrior, seemingly in his late 30s, pushed Woo-moon away just before he bumped into the woman. "Oh my!" exclaimed the beautiful woman beside the warrior. She was dressed in red, with a veil over her face. "Ouch!" Woo-moon fell on his back. As the tall and slender woman stared at him, he rubbed his sore butt with a blank look on his face. "Senseless idiot, you've scared our young mistress. Hurry up and apologize." The middle-aged warrior roared in anger. The 5 younger warriors behind him immediately stepped forward. "Song Woo-moon, you bloody imbecile. We'll teach him a lesson." The 5 younger warriors proclaimed to the lady in red in an attempt to gain her favor, even though she hadn't requested it. In fact, the 5 young men knew Woo-moon since they were kids and could be considered childhood friends. They had followed Woo-moon around like he was the leader of their group. However, they had eventually become bullies, and he had become their target. "Stop it. Just as Wu Moon was about to take a hit, the beautiful woman raised her hand, gesturing to the men to stop. Bullying the weak is not right. Sensing the tension and fearing a beating, Song Wu Moon jumped up and ran off. However, his day only worsened when he bumped into another group of people around the corner. Ugh! He rolled backward when the pale-faced man he had bumped into shoved him away. How dare you! The young man shouted sharply as he looked down at the muddied Wu Moon before finally noticing the beautiful woman in red. Oh, I didn't see you there, dear Si-yeon. The young man licked his lips as he ogled the lady's body. The beautiful woman, Yeon Si-yeon, frowned under her veil. She was the precious young mistress of the Libi Merchant Guild. You son of a bitch, Si-yeon murmured under her breath. The young man could hear her saying something but couldn't figure out what it was. What? What did you just say? He questioned. No, I didn't say anything, answered Si-yeon with an indifferent expression. The young man's expression distorted as he bit down on his lips. The Libi Merchant Guild and the Gwan-un Martial Arts School were influential organizations in this area, and their two successors were now engaged in a war of nerves. In the midst of it, Dae-woong came out due to the disturbance and saw his son covered in dirt. He ran forward with a heavy heart. Oh my, kiddo, are you okay? Are you hurt? Hey, Daddy! After the young man had pushed him, Wu Moon had rolled on the ground and ended up with a bleeding wound on his head. Yet, he was still flashing a foolish smile to his father, despite all that. Tears started to pool in Dae-woong's eyes. I can't live my destined life because of this guy, murmured Dae-woong under his breath as he pulled his son into an embrace. Meanwhile, Wu Moon continued staring at the ground with a blank face. They started appearing, in his eyes and in his mind, each stroke of that landscape painting. Each line elaborately drawn with a very thin brush. They were alive and moving fiercely. Wu Moon's brain cells always reached their limit whenever he thought of those complicated and difficult movements. But he couldn't stop, and he wouldn't have stopped even if he had been able to. As a result, as long as he used most of his brain cells on the landscape painting's hermetic interpretation, others continued to see him as a fool. The movement of the lines entranced him. Witnessing, comprehending, feeling, and learning this beautiful dance made Wu Moon feel blissful. Wu Moon's 20th birthday passed by like that. Dae-woong had been very strong since he was young. Even before he was 15, he had arm wrestled against all the local men and won. However, an unexpected incident left him gravely injured. He lost his memories and wound up in the village as a lone orphan. Thankfully, the kind-hearted local magistrate blessed him with food and shelter. In the year when Dae-woong turned 15, the magistrate died due to an unexpected mishap, and his family was forced to move to another place. However, Dae-woong remained in the village. He built a small hut at the foot of the mountain near the village and utilized his innate strength to cut down trees and gather wood for a living. Over the years, he even managed to save up some money. Everything was going well, but he was still single at the age of 25. He hadn't been giving much thought to his situation, not to mention his standards for the opposite gender were too high. It's a given. None of the girls in the village is qualified to be my wife. That was what Dae-woong always said. Just when he finally decided to go on an expedition to another village in search of a bride, he came across the woman who would later be the mother of his sons, Wu Moon and Wu Gang. Just like Dae-woong's first appearance, she also arrived at the village with injuries all over. She was alone, with a sword at her waist, and the villagers avoided her, saying she might be from the Mormon. However, Dae-woong fell in love with the woman, Baek Jin-jin, at first sight. He approached and proposed to her without hesitation. Jin-jin outrightly ignored Dae-woong and declared that she would stay single. That same day, she sought shelter in the house of a widow in the village. Nevertheless, Dae-woong never gave up. He kept proposing to her, like an unwavering tree that not even storms could fell. However, he was unable to convince Jin-jin to marry him despite proposing 30 times. Even after 100 tries, her answer didn't change. Eventually, even the villagers began to help him persuade Jin-jin. By the 120th proposal, Dae-woong finally won Jin-jin's heart. After marrying her, Dae-woong opened an inn with the money he had saved up. After some time, Wu Moon, the first fruit of love between them, was born. However, Jinjin was physically weak, and her health only worsened after giving birth to Wu Moon. After the birth of their second son, Wu Gang, Jinjin became so weak that she couldn't even endure the slightest cold wind. For this reason, Song Dae-woong spent most of the profits they earned from the inn to pay for his wife's medical bills. Whenever his wife cried because she felt sorry for their situation, Dae-woong pounded his chest, saying, "It's all right. How can I call myself a man if I can't even afford my wife's medicine? Don't worry about anything. Just take care of yourself, okay?" Wu Moon, Dae-woong's first son, looked just like his mom. He was handsome, slender, and incredibly smart. But being extremely intelligent was a double-edged sword, since it gave him an eccentric side. He had no hesitation in expressing how he felt and refused to do anything he disliked. At one point, Dae-woong sighed at his son's personality. "He resembles you in most aspects, but why didn't he inherit your personality?" Jinjin replied with a soft smile, "I was like that as well before I got sick." Personalities change when healthy people become ill. As Wu Moon grew up, his physical constitution weakened like his mother's, and he began to turn meek. On the other hand, Wu Gang inherited the strengths of both his father and his mother. He was born strong and made other boys 3 or 4 years older than him cry, while his intelligence was by no means inferior to his older brothers. When Wu Moon was 10 and Wu Gang was 7, members of the Mount Hua sect boarded at the inn and coincidentally saw the two of them. "Hey kid, what are you doing?" "Let's go," the man instructed Wu Gang. Though his body was fragile, Wu Moon was always cheerful. However, at this moment, he was radiating a deep sadness unfit for his age as he stared blankly at the back of his younger brother, who was departing. Despite the immense hardships in life, Wu Moon never complained and accepted himself for who he was. No matter how sick he was, he didn't express his feelings and thoughts to avoid making his parents worry. He couldn't help but be concerned about his mother even though he was sick as well. Tears welled up around his eyes. Dae-woong felt so sorry for Wu Moon, who watched his younger brother leave to become a disciple of the Mount Hua sect. Before he knew it, his eyes were filled with tears as well. His heart ached. How disappointed and sad could he be? The world is so unfair to him just because he's weak. From a very young age, his two sons had the same interests. Whether the story was about a chivalrous Murim hero or the life of an unknown martial artist, such tales would fascinate them. Well, any child at that age envied the fascinating adventures that were associated with the Murim, but it was far more so for his two sons. And soon, an opportunity finally presented itself. A group of travelers from the Mount Hua sect, famous for their swordsmanship, arrived in this small town. As soon as he saw the swordsman, Dae-woong was as excited as a child, even though he was already a married man, and pride filled him up when they recognized his son's intelligence. However, he felt uneasy when they seemed disappointed after checking Wu Moon's body a few times and then announcing they only wanted Wu Gang as their disciple. Even though his eldest son pretended to be unaffected in front of his younger brother, there was no way Dae-woong couldn't feel his sorrow. How could he smile in satisfaction when one of his children was like that? "Are you disappointed?" Dae-woong asked. There was a deeper meaning to that question. Wu Moon, staring at the back of his younger brother and the members of the Mount Hua sect blankly, soon smiled brightly. He looked to his father and answered, "No, Daddy, it's okay. It doesn't matter." At that moment, a slender, thin hand grabbed Wu Moon's hand. "Mother," Wu Moon called out. Before they knew it, Jinjin had come out and was now holding her son's hand tightly. She didn't say anything, but her eyes shone with warmth. "Why did you come all the way here?" "You'll start coughing all day once you're exposed to the cold air. Go back inside, hurry." Led by Dae-woong, Jinjin followed him as she weakly said, "I'm still worried, honey. The Murim isn't just a splendid dream, it's a lonely and heartless place. Let him be, honey. I couldn't dissuade him when he desired that opportunity so dearly." The family went back into the inn, and the cook whipped up a sumptuous dinner for them. After the meal, Wu Moon said goodnight to his parents and returned to his room calmly. As soon as the door was closed, tears flowed from his eyes. He cried, covering his mouth with a blanket out of fear of his parents hearing him. It was an unfair, miserable, and sad day. "I can do it too. Even if I'm weaker than others, I can join the Murim. I'm confident I can learn martial arts and become a great warrior," 1% better than anyone else. The innate weakness that had plagued him since he was young hampered him again. Why am I weaker than others? Why is my life harder than others? Why wasn't I chosen by the people of Mount Hua? Wu Moon cried for a long time. Huh? What? Wu Moon suddenly heard his father gasping in surprise. Hurriedly opening the window and looking downward, he witnessed an unbelievable scene. The streets were completely empty, but there was an old Taoist floating in the air right in front of the inn. He had silvery hair, and a beard encompassed his gracious and solemn face, making him look like the legendary Jade Emperor. The Taoist slowly walked down what looked like invisible stairs, finally stepping onto the ground in front of the inn. Wow, wow, Wu Moon's jaw dropped. In no time, Wu Moon ran down at an incredible speed, hurriedly opened the door of the inn, and glared outside. The old man was real. He was not an illusion. Now standing on flat ground, the old Taoist smiled kindly. I'm quite hungry, child. Would you give me a bowl of noodles? He asked Dai Wung, who was standing next to Wu Moon. 1. Commonly known as Wulin in Chinese novels, it refers to the world of martial organizations, for example, sex and martial arts schools. Song Dai Wung was in his mid-30s and was definitely not a child, but he had no issues with the Taoist calling him that. He quickly went inside the inn after hearing the old man's words. Yes, I'll inform the cook to prepare your order. Wu Moon, show him the best seat. All right, Daddy. Follow me, sir. In the eyes of the young Wu Moon, the Taoist was undoubtedly an immortal. If he had been a human, there was no way he could have walked in the sky like that. Wu Moon guided the old Taoist to the cleanest and warmest place in the inn and provided him with the most comfortable chair available. With a kind smile, the Taoist said, "Thank you, child." "Don't mention it, sir," answered Wu Moon. Even after speaking up, Wu Moon didn't leave the Taoist's side. He didn't dare to start a conversation either. However, he watched every action of the Taoist with sparkling eyes. As the Taoist ate the noodles that Dai Wung had diligently prepared and served him, he gave Wu Moon a soft smile from time to time. After eating the noodles and the free dumplings that Dai Wung added, the Taoist stood up. "It was a delicious meal. How much is it?" "Oh, no. You don't have to pay for the meal, sir. I'm honored to have the opportunity to serve you food. I won't accept your money, so please don't worry about that." Embarrassed, the Taoist answered, "Huh. Even though I'm tight on funds, I don't wish to cause trouble. Can you get me some paper and a fine brush?" Dai Wung's eyes sparkled. He thought the Taoist would write down a blessing for the inn and himself. The writings of a famous Taoist in exchange for a bowl of noodles? I'm definitely the one profiting. Yes, please wait. I'll be right back. Dai Wung searched quickly and found some paper in the house, but he couldn't find a brush. He tried to send his son out to buy a fine brush, but seeing how mesmerized his son was over the Taoists, he headed out with a bitter smile. Dai Wung rushed as fast as he could, afraid that the old Taoist would leave while he was away. Although he was afraid to ask the Taoist about his identity, what really mattered was that the man was clearly an immortal. If he's an immortal, does his name even matter? Meanwhile, the old Taoist nodded at Song Wu Moon, who was sitting next to him. "You really wanted to learn martial arts, huh? You even cried." At that moment, Song Wu Moon's face turned red. Rather than being perplexed over how the old Taoist knew about it, he was more embarrassed about his actions. "Oh no, I didn't cry. How can a man show tears over such a thing?" A smile appeared on the Taoist's lips. He found Wu Moon's prideful response adorable. Just then, Dai Wung returned. "Huff, huff. Here you, Jigo. Thank you. Since you don't wish to accept my money, I'll draw you a landscape painting with my poor skills instead." The Taoist then spread the paper out on the table and started to paint. Swoosh, swoosh. The brushwork was fluid. At first, it seemed like the Taoist was painting without much thought. However, as time went by, Dai Wung and Wu Moon stood there with their mouths agape. The scribble-like lines gradually changed, forming distinctive mountains and water. Various trees and animals then came alive in the painting. Just then, Wu Moon noticed something unusual. "Huh? I'm sure the brush never went there." Ink appeared in places the brush had never touched. "Wow! Is this yet another skill of an immortal?" After a while, the landscape painting was completed. "There we go. The drawing is complete. I hope you cherish it, because I drew it with affection and gratitude. I shall take my leave." After his remarks, the old Taoist left the inn without hesitation. Daewon rushed out and shouted, "Sir, wait a minute. Please tell me your name." "Haha, you don't need to know the name of a forgotten old man. I'm just a member of the celestial sect." Meanwhile, Song Woo Moon was engrossed with the landscape painting. Soon he heard a voice. "The path is neither beneficial nor harmful to anyone, but it is also equally beneficial and harmful to all things in existence. Knowing many things does not mean that you have understood them, and understanding many things does not mean that you actually know them. And even if you understand and know many things, it does not mean you have become a saint." Only Wu Moon heard the old Taoist's words. As he stood in front of the landscape painting and was lost in thought with a blank expression, he heard the last sentence. "Now I have completed my task in this world." The words Song Wu Moon had heard earlier were phrases from Laozi's Tao Te Ching 1. Laozi was the sect master of the celestial sect, also known as the 5 Pecks of Rice sect. Wu Moon understood neither what it meant to be a member of the celestial sect, nor the meaning behind the phrases of Tao Te Ching. He was just immersed in the ecstatic movements within the landscape painting, but he woke up after hearing the last words the old Taoist had left. 2 martial arts could be obtained from the landscape painting. They were the celestial sect's forbidden divine art and the gentle celestial sword art. These 2 arts invited Wu Moon into another world, one of limitless knowledge. That world of joy had not given up on Wu Moon, and Wu Moon himself did not plan to let go of that world either. The mysterious power of the landscape painting forcibly occupied over 90% of Song Wu Moon's brain cells, and he could only think, study, and learn about the 2 martial arts. Since then, Wu Moon's health rapidly improved, which brought joy to Daewon and his wife. On the other hand, Wu Moon also appeared to become more and more foolish, which caused his parents even greater anxiety than the poor constitution he used to have. The Dongpyeong Inn, which also served as Wu Moon's and his family's residence, was located in Unhan, the area of Guangdong province farthest from the sea. 40 kilometers away from Unhan and further inland was a huge sorghum field called Goryang Plains. 10 days after Song Wu Moon's 20th birthday, a confrontation between 2 masters would be held there, on a level that caught the whole Murams. Attention! One was the Palm Martial Emperor Baek Sang-woon, one of the 8 heavenly martial emperors, and the other was the Night-Spear Devil Gyeong Hong, one of the 6 rising challengers. The confrontation between absolute masters representing the old generation and the new generation would set the stage for a new era. Therefore, the attention of all martial artists was focused on Goryang Plains. In addition, many masters who rarely appeared in the public's eye were also heading toward Goryang Plains. "Sigh, what are we going to do now?" Daewon lamented while looking at the accounts and calculating with his abacus. He continued to groan, repeatedly trying to make more sense of the figures while pushing the abacus beads. On the contrary, Wu Moon had no thoughts to speak of, and he was staring at the landscape painting with his mouth blankly open, as always. Daewon was grumbling about the inn's financial issues. "Why are we at such great losses? We're in big trouble." Sales had been on a decline, and this month they had finally gone into the reds. Thinking about the cost of his wife's medicine, Daewon felt dejected. At this rate, the future only looked bleaker and bleaker. "We don't have much money left, and if we continue to incur losses like this, we won't be able to survive the winter." Song Daewon sighed. These financial problems were making it very difficult for him to make a living for his family. Inevitably, Daewon looked at Wu Moon with resentful eyes. Despite being a grown man, his son still couldn't take care of himself. At 16 years old, a man was supposed to be starting a family and taking responsibility beyond his own health. Yet his 20-year-old son was still living off him. Daewon glared at Song Wu Moon, and his gaze then naturally landed on the landscape painting on the wall. That damned thing. If it weren't for that, he couldn't throw it away despite wanting it too many times due to the fear that the Taoist might be a real immortal. No matter how much I think about it, everything leads back to that painting. Ever since I hung it up there, Wu Moon has turned into a fool. The Taoist definitely a scam. Solidifying his determination, Dae Wong stared fiercely at the landscape painting. Seemingly sensing his father's murderous intent toward the painting, Wu Moon looked back at the former in surprise. He then stood in front of the painting and shook his head at his father. "Get out of my way, kid. I'll tear it up and burn it." "No, Daddy." Dae Wong pushed Wu Moon away and reached for the landscape painting. However, Wu Moon desperately grabbed onto Dae Wong's pants, so Dae Wong couldn't stretch out and grab the painting. His arms were quite short, so that played a role as well. "Let me go, you damn punk!" Dae Wong had been famous for his strength since his youth. Now that he had gotten older, he could no longer demonstrate the same power as before, but he was still much stronger than the average man. However, Wu Moon had just managed to pin him down. Huh? Has he always been this strong? Dae Wong failed to shake off Wu Moon no matter how hard he tried. Get the latest chapters on Novelbin.com. At that moment, the door of the inn suddenly opened and two people came in. They were an old Taoist in a white uniform and a pretty teenage girl in red. The fight between Dae Wong and Wu Moon took them aback. It was embarrassing to be seen fighting with his grown child. Dae Wong's face turned red as he coughed awkwardly. Welcome. 1. Tao Te Ching, also spelled Tao Te Ching, is a fundamental Taoist text considered to be written by Laozi around 400 BC. Since Dae Wong had years of experience running an inn, he managed to quickly dispose of his embarrassment and guide the guests to the best seats left. Teehee, the girl with large eyes and distinctive double eyelids, continued to smile and giggle at Wu Moon. Perhaps she found the scene she had seen as soon as she entered the inn funny. Just like any adolescent girl of her age, once she burst into laughter, she couldn't hold it in. Dae Wong should have felt bad since she was laughing at his son, but he didn't. After all, it had been so long since he had last heard the laughter of a young lady. "What would you like to order?" Dae Wong asked. In response, the old Taoist looked at the girl. Ahem. Please bring a bowl of plain noodles without meat for him, and I'd like to have a bowl of chicken noodles with meat dumplings. At the bright girl's words, Dae Wong smiled pleasantly and nodded. All right, please, wait a minute. After Dae Wong entered the kitchen to deliver the order to the cook, the old Taoist frowned. "They'd likely feel offended if you laugh like that, Doa." "You have to abstain from laughing even if the situation is funny," Doa answered with a big smile. "All right, I'm sorry, old sect master. But what can I do?" It was hilarious. Honestly, it was funny to you too, wasn't it? Hee. When Doa tucked her hands back and stuck out her tongue to act cute, the old Taoist could no longer resist bursting into laughter. "You little girl, ha 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 ha." The old Taoist, Jijin Wen Mayong, continued to look and smile at Doa warmly. Doa then noticed Wu Moon out of the corner of her eyes. He was looking at the landscape painting, completely mesmerized. "Is there anything special about that landscape painting?" Doa looked at it with curiosity, but she didn't find anything out of the ordinary. When she tilted her head, Wen Mayong looked toward where Doa's gaze fell, an ordinary piece of landscape painting on the wall. "I'm sure it's nothing special, but..." "Oh ho!" Wen Mayong's eyes grew bigger. He rose from his seat and walked toward the landscape painting. Wu Moon's eyes widened, seeing Wen Mayong standing next to him staring at the landscape painting. "Oh, I don't know who drew this, but the artist properly utilized the classical drawing technique. It shouldn't have been long ago when this was painted, but the drawing itself is amazing." Since Wen Mayong was generally interested in calligraphy and painting, he wanted to look at the landscape painting in more detail. However, the food was already being served at that moment. "Old sect master, please return to your seat neat." "Oh yes, I'm coming." The landscape painting was interesting to Wen Mayong, but it couldn't compare to a pleasant meal with Doa, who was the disciple of his own disciple. A grand disciple of his, in other words. Just then, Dae Wong suddenly recalled the package that he needed to send to his neighbor. However, since he couldn't go because he had guests, he decided to order his incompetent son to do it. "Kid, deliver this to Moon's family. Make sure you say thank you, all right? This order's already late. I was supposed to have this delivered to them by lunch, so hurry up." "No, Daddy. If I go, you're going to throw away the painting." Wu Moon's words made Dae Wong flinch. He's weirdly sharp at times. "I'm not going to throw it away." "Hurry up and go. If you promise not to throw it away, I'll go, W Moon responded. Hey, roared Dae Woong. If you make a promise, you should never break it. Those were the first words Baek Jin Jin told him after she had given birth and started raising their children. She firmly stated that she hated people who broke their promises the most, and that she wouldn't raise her sons like that. As a result, all members of their family valued keeping their promises more than anything else. Dae Woong had firmly abided by those beliefs and principles since then. The words of his wife, who was more precious to him than his own life, had become his lifelong belief. Sigh. Yes, I promise not to throw it away. Go and come back quickly. All right, Daddy. Woo Moon felt that he shouldn't leave the landscape painting for some reason, but in the end he thought it would be okay since his father had promised. He took the things Dae Woong handed him and headed out for delivery. After Woo Moon left, Won Myong, who was eating noodles, felt something awry. The landscape painting he had seen earlier piqued his interest. Something about it seems unusual. What is it? Why does it keep bothering me? Won Myong quickly finished his noodles, jumped out of his seat, and walked over to it. Profound energy. Yeah, that's it. The landscape painting had some kind of profound energy he couldn't recognize. He was very surprised, both as a member of the Miram and a Taoist. What is this landscape painting? How does a simple painting hold such strong remnants of profound energy? While thinking so, he suddenly noticed a part of the painting. A bird was holding a worm in its mouth, but it didn't look satisfied. It was staring at the larger worm the bird next to it had caught. Instantly, Won Myong's mouth dropped agape. Oh ho! The unknowing realization and enlightenment had allowed him to break through the ninth wall of the peerless, immaculate divine arts, which had held him back thus far. A sudden pleasant wind emerged, flowing around him. Whoa! After taking a deep breath, he recovered his senses and looked at the landscape painting once more. He still didn't know why this mystical energy was present in this landscape painting. However, he had achieved a breakthrough in his martial arts simply by comprehending the maxim, "The grass is greener on the other side." It was a saying that was well known by all, yet this painting had allowed him to comprehend its very essence. Knowing an adage is different from comprehending it, as I could see from my own situation. And if I let my mind wander to another section, that landscape painting would have given me a different realization accordingly. The enlightenment he had gained was as minuscule as a firefly in front of the full moon in the light of the entire landscape painting. Upon realizing that, Won Myong became certain. This is a priceless treasure for any Taoist cultivator. Just then, Dae Woong passed by him. Excuse me, Yin Master. Yes? At that moment, Won Myong thought, surely they aren't aware of this landscape painting's value. There was no way they could ever know the potential of the martial arts in this painting. This was clear to Won Myong, as none of the people in this inn showed the characteristics of someone who had learned martial arts. The landscape painting had great value for Won Myong, but it was just a simple drawing that was worth nothing to these people. Won Myong's greed, which he thought he had already abandoned in the past, resurfaced in his heart. He felt apologetic to the owner's son, who was clearly attached to the painting, but he thought that this result was inevitable. Pearls cast before swine ought to be retrieved and given to those who rightfully deserve them. Can you sell this painting to me? Dae Woong's eyes flashed wide open. It was a good opportunity to dispose of the painting, which he found difficult to deal with. The buyer was a Taoist too, so something like an unknown curse wouldn't befall him. On the other hand, he wondered if this was a painting of really high value. It's a tough situation, but as Dae Woong blurted out his words because he felt sorry for Woo Moon, Won Myong interjected. If you're in need of money, why don't you sell it to me? How much do you want? Name your price. 5 gold taels, Dae Woong answered, wondering if that was too high. Of course, it was right to call for a higher price when bargaining, but if that was too high, it could backfire. 5 gold taels? All right, hold on a second. Dae Woong was surprised. Won Myong truly looked like he was going to buy the painting at that price. Won Myong looked at his purse and turned around. Doa, didn't you say you had 2 gold taels? Give them to me. If I lend it to you now, you have to pay me 3 gold taels later. Fine, just hurry up. Come on. All right, Myong quickly handed Dae Woong 5 gold taels, 3 of which were his and the other 2 from DOA. Dae Woong received the money. overjoyed that he managed to sell the painting for an unimaginable price. Oh heavens! 5 gold taels! Daewon's hands trembled at the unthinkable sum of money. But then, he remembered the promise that he had made to his son. He felt uncomfortable breaking a promise which he himself knew should be upheld. However, the inn's deplorable finances and his wife's expensive medicine left him with no other choice. I feel bad for Woo Moon, but if I buy him some meat with this money, it should all work out. And if he considers things even a little bit, he'll be happy, because I'll be able to buy his mother's medication with this. Daewon hurriedly rolled up the painting and handed it over to Won Mayong, concerned that the latter would change his mind. Here you go. Please have a safe journey. Daewon seemed to be in a hurry for Won Mayong to leave. However, Won Mayong hesitated for a while because he felt something pricking at his conscience. As such, he eventually unfastened the old sword sheathed at his waist and put it on the table. I don't think I've paid enough, so please take this sword as well. And, old sect master, that SS word, Dewey, let out a shrill cry upon witnessing Won Mayong hand over the old sword to Daewon. Her eyes were larger than ever. However, Won Mayong just pushed the old sword toward Daewon without hesitation or even looking at Doa once. I'll explain the details later, Doa. Stand down for now. Eh? But there's no way. It's the divine frost sword. How can you give it to? Doa, be quiet. This is ridiculous. Daewon didn't know the value of this old sword, but his heart was pounding hard. Listening to the conversation between the two, he could somewhat guess as to the worth of the sword. It had to be significant. This old Taoist has got to be the god of fortune. He already gave me 5 gold taels and now he's also handing over such a precious sword. Won Mayong left with the landscape painting in his hand. Doa trailed behind him, sulking. After a while, Woo Moon entered the inn. Dad, I'm Ba. His eyes turned toward the empty wall. The landscape painting was no longer there. Woo Moon's eyes, which had always been blank, suddenly gave off a cold gaze. He burned it, didn't he? If it's thrown away, I can just look for it. If it's torn, I can put it back together even if it's hard. However, there's nothing I can do if he burned it. Cough. You're back. Daewon faked a cough. Woo Moon looked at his father with an icy stare. Where's the landscape painting? Daewon's eyes grew bigger. Woo Moon didn't look as stupid as he usually did. Clearly, his son wasn't happy. He had broken a promise after all. I don't know. You do. What did you do? Did you burn it? No, punk. Did you tear it apart? No. Did you throw it all away? No. Woon could figure out better than anyone else whether Daewon's words were false or not. His father was evidently telling the truth, but not the whole truth. Just then, Woo Moon suddenly remembered the guest that had come earlier. At that time, he had been in a dreamy state, but his memory remained relatively detailed because of the landscape painting's uniqueness. The Taoist was interested in the landscape painting. You sold it, didn't you? Huh? Daewon's exclamation convinced Woo Moon. His eyes turned to the sword on the table. After picking it up, Woo Moon held out his palm to his father. Give it to me. What do you mean? Woo Moon didn't know about the family finances because Daewon kept his worries to himself and never informed his son. He also had been in that dreamy state because of the landscape painting, which forced him to live as a fool. If he had known the reason behind this sale was his mother, he would have given up the landscape painting. But alas, Daewon did not have the leisure to explain it to him now. They paid you money, didn't they? Give it to me quickly. I don't want to, punk. Then you'll be in trouble. What will you do if mommy hears you lied to me and sold the landscape painting? Gasp! Hand it over. Although he hesitated for a while, Daewon ended up giving the money to Moon with a sigh. When did you sell it? No. When did that damn Taoist leave? About half an ho. Before Daewon could finish his sentence, Woo Moon opened the door of the inn and ran out. Daewon felt as if he had been inside a dream, being questioned like this by his son who had been acting like a fool for quite a while now. What's wrong with him all of a sudden? Woo Moon ran quickly toward the city gates. He could roughly guess where the old Taoist, Won Mayong, was heading. He had heard it many times in the past in his subconscious, Go Ryang Pyong, where 2 absolute masters would compete. They had to be heading in that direction. Damn scammer! You think my priceless treasure is only worth this much? We'll see about that. After passing the city gates, Wu Moon saw Wan Myong and DOA in the far distance. Wu Moon wasn't out of breath, even though he hadn't stopped to rest for even a moment. As he closed in on them, he took a large breath before shouting, "Stoop!" The young man himself was surprised by his own thunderous shout. His voice was louder than a tiger's roar, making him wonder if this was what a cry of a legendary great Peng or azure dragon sounded like. Wu Moon's shout did not lose volume even at a distance. The chi of the celestial sect's forbidden divine art had never been activated and just lay dormant in his body, but it had actually come alive at this moment. Thinking he had unexpectedly obtained a heavenly chance that could improve his martial arts, Jin Wan Myong was smiling. However, the sudden shout from behind them surprised him. Who is that? That person's cultivation was nothing compared to his own, but the voice carried a pure and vast chi. Turning around, Wan Myong saw Doa seemingly in pain. Doa had turned pale. She had covered both her ears, greatly disturbed by this voice filled with powerful chi. Wan Myong grabbed her shoulder and redirected the invading chi out of her body before shouting, "Stop it, you bastard!" This was the first time that Wu Moon had roared like this, with all his might. It had triggered the explosive outburst of his ever-dormant chi, and he actually couldn't stop his shout on his own. Wan Myong's shout actually caused Wu Moon's breathing to stop. The old master used the azure dragon cry, which caused a shock to Wu Moon's heart. Only then did Wu Moon stop shouting. For a moment, Wu Moon felt a sense of loss and despondency. The explosive chi of the celestial sect's forbidden divine arts sank back into the depths of his body. Thankfully, he suffered no heavy internal injuries. Wu Moon ran ahead and stood in the way of Wan Myong and Doa. "Aren't you the innkeeper's son?" Wan Myong looked at Wu Moon for a moment in surprise. He barely managed to stop himself from saying the innkeeper's foolish son. "Huh?" Doa was surprised as she opened her eyes and found out that it was WW had blasted her with that sudden burst of lion's roar. She had thought that he didn't know about martial arts at all. Wan Myong's eyes had become luminescent, shining with a conspicuous color as he looked at the young man in front of him. However, the next moment, surprise, curiosity, and a sense of regret threw his facial expression in disarray. He had just remembered the landscape painting in his arms. Oh, heavens! The painting must have belonged to this young man. He was learning martial arts from this. I have committed a big mistake. He had thought that no one in the inn knew martial arts, which had led him to believe that the hidden great martial arts in the landscape painting were rotting away in that inn without seeing the light of day. No, this was just an excuse. If they weren't aware of it, I should have let them know and paid a fair price for the landscape painting. This painting's value is much greater than a mere 5 gold taels and the divine frost sword. Upon coming to that realization, Wan Myong became incredibly ashamed. Indeed, he had been greedy and defrauded a villager who was unaware that he held a treasure and was selling it for less than its fair value. As Wan Myong belatedly blamed himself for his mistake, Wu Moon pointed at the landscape painting in the Taoist's hands. "That landscape painting is mine." And Wu Moon took out the sword and gold he had brought and laid them down on the ground. "That's my treasure, and I don't want to trade it. I don't know whether that landscape painting is more valuable than these things or not, but I know that it is more important to me than anything else." What he said was true. Wu Moon had no idea how great the value of the landscape painting was and what the value of the divine frost sword was. All he knew was that the landscape painting was the most precious treasure to him aside from his family. If he could only choose between the world and this landscape painting, he would likely choose the latter. Wu Moon had wanted to shout, "Hey, you damn Taoist! Return them now." But he respected the senior's age and didn't wish to embarrass him in front of his granddaughter. He thought that Wan Myong was Doa's grandfather. Wu Moon's words were polite, yet solemn. However, Wan Myong was still under the influence of his short-lived greed. At the same time, he was curious. This young man has outstanding cultivation. Is it because he learned the martial arts within the landscape painting? I want to see how good he is. Besides, he needs to learn a little lesson after what he did to Doa with the lion's roar. Wan Myong's cultivation level was the highest in his sect, but he was still somewhat lacking in terms of temperament due to his stubbornness and impatient heart. As though the struggle inside him had never happened, Wan Myong smiled. "Well, I've already bought this landscape painting from your father. What rights do you have to ask me to give it back?" The landscape painting, the painting is, Wu Moon was speechless and could only reiterate his words. In fact, strictly speaking, the painting belonged to his father. The immortal had drawn the painting for the inn in exchange for a bowl of plain noodles when Wu Moon was 10. Hence, his father had ownership over it, not him. Still, he wasn't willing to give up the painting just like that. "Doesn't matter. I'm not giving that up. Leave the painting behind and go your way." What an overbearing statement. But according to your father, it seems that your situation at home isn't all that great right now. Are you aware of that? Wu Moon was momentarily dazed. Since he had been living like a fool while in his dreamlike state, he didn't know how his family was faring in detail, but Wan Myong's words woke him up. Financial trouble. A mom, her medical bills. Thinking that he wouldn't be able to afford his mother's medicine if he were to take the painting back, he suddenly felt breathless and shaken. No matter how priceless the landscape painting is, it's nothing compared to my beloved parents. Then, just as Wu Moon closed his eyes and was about to say that he would give up the landscape painting, Wan Myong let out a chuckle. "Oh, okay, let's do this instead. If you can land an attack on me even once, I'll return the landscape painting and I won't take back the money I've already given you. What do you think? But aren't you losing out if you do that? That's all right. I already acquired something good enough in exchange for the money, and considering your family's situation, this is the least I can do." Wan Myong answered, feeling apologetic for his mistake. "You have a good heart," Wan Myong thought to himself. Wu Moon had no reason to refuse since the conditions were completely in his favor. "Then, I'll accept. Come on, try and win this challenge with your skills." Wan Myong was known as the first sword of Kunlun. Even though he wasn't able to become one of the 8 heavenly martial emperors, he was still considered a peak expert who was not that far behind them, and he was also aiming for the absolute realm. The old Taoist carried a sword, and because of that, Wu Moon figured that he was a martial artist from the Morum. He also vaguely knew that what he had learned through the landscape painting was some kind of martial art. However, he had no idea of his own personal strength, much less Wan Myong's. Even though he's a martial artist, he's old. I'm in my prime, so I should be stronger than him, right? Wu Moon thought. "You won't regret it, will you?" Wu Moon asked for confirmation once again. Doa stepped back on her own in response to the rising tension. She wasn't nervous or worried about Wan Myong, though, since she believed in him wholeheartedly. "Regret? Ha 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 ha. If you think you can make me regret it, go ahead and try." Wan Myong waited for Wu Moon to attack. It would have been unfair for him to make the first move on someone much younger and less experienced than him. However, Wu Moon couldn't advance easily. He didn't even know what to do, because this was the first time in his life he was actually using the martial arts he had learned. Walking forward calmly, Wan Myong said, "If you're just going to stand there and not do anything, I will be leaving." As Wan Myong passed by, Wu Moon hurriedly reached out to the landscape painting in Wan Myong's hand, but only managed to touch empty air. Wan Myong avoided the attack like a ghost. "I can't give up just because I failed once." Wu Moon kept trying to swipe the landscape painting with his left and right hands one after the other. His movements were disorderly and had no form or technique. In addition, there was no hint of martial cultivation in his movements, unlike when he had used the lion's roar earlier. "What is this? Isn't this the movement of someone who hasn't learned any martial arts?" Disappointment appeared on Wan Myong's face. Just then, Wu Moon reached out once again. At that moment, Wan Myong's hands moved in a strange pattern around Wu Moon's hand. Before he could understand what was happening, an unknown force hurled Wu Moon into the air. He was forcefully spun around his own axis twice, then landed on the ground on his butt. Thud. There were only 2 things that Wu Moon had been able to learn from the landscape painting: the celestial sex forbidden divine art and the gentle celestial sword technique. Unfortunately, the painting didn't contain anything about hand-to-hand combat. Wan Myong's hands hadn't even touched Wu Moon's arm. He had just twisted and thrown the young man away using qi emitted from his palms. Wu Moon didn't even know how the old master had done it. Tisk. Wan Myong had just used the crane-chasing dragon palm, a high-level martial art that allowed him to interact with objects without actually touching them. Unaware of that, Wu Moon jumped up and rushed forward, this time without hesitation. The old Taoist frowned at the sight. I can't believe he's recklessly charging at me without knowing his limits. Wan Myong felt nothing but disdain for his young and naive opponent's arrogance. He once more used the crane-chasing dragon palm. Considering how poor his cultivation level is, the same technique is enough for me to deal with him. As Wu Moon was reaching for the painting, Wan Myong's hands approached him from both sides. As he reached about 5 inches from Wu Moon's sides, Wan Myong moved his hands once more. The qi generated a small vortex that spread widely, forcing Wu Moon to the left. In response, Wu Moon instinctively put all his weight on his left foot. At that very moment, the vortex reversed and unleashed speed and power incomparable to its initial state. Thud! Wu Moon fell on his back again, this time harder. He clenched his teeth as his eyes captured the freezing blue sky. It doesn't matter how many times I fall. I don't care if I fall thousands of times. I must get that landscape painting back. Wu Moon was very fond of that landscape painting. He enjoyed dreaming, and the painting had allowed him to stay in his dreamy state. In his heart, the old immortal that had made the landscape painting was his teacher and his hero. Read new chapters on Noville Bean. Calm. I can't lose such a gift in vain. Wu Moon jumped up, with strong resolve and fire that he had never felt before surging from deep inside his heart. I won't give up! Wu Moon leaped at Wan Myong again. Wan Myong didn't avoid his attack. Rather, he simply performed the crane-chasing dragon palm again. This time, however, in Wu Moon's eyes, Wan Myong's movements had slowed down immensely, as if time itself had turned viscous and sticky. I need to see through it. Following Wan Myong's hand movement, something intangible covered Wu Moon's arms and body, sticking to him like glue. His arms spun to the left with strong force. Wu Moon put a bit of strength on his left side again, this time on purpose. As he pretended to struggle, Wan Myong's energy spun rapidly in the opposite direction. This is it! Wu Moon held out with all the strength he had saved. He regained his balance for a moment, but the next moment, the airstream surrounding him shifted directions once more. Ouch! With a low groan, Wu Moon fell forward this time. Maybe because he didn't expect to fall over, he ate quite the strong impact. Did you think the crane-chasing dragon palm was that simple? Questioned Wan Myong. Wu Moon had thought that pretending to turn left, then swiftly turning the other way around was all he needed to do, which had ultimately prevented him from being able to adjust to the sudden change in directional force. Watching from afar, Doa felt sorry for Wu Moon. She hoped for the battle to end quickly and without any further injury. Having been thrown away, Wu Moon grabbed onto the ground with immense force. So much force, in fact, that the small rocks among the fistful of earth and grass cut into his skin. His inability to reach his opponent and retrieve the landscape painting made him furious. He was under so much frustration that he felt like he would burst because of it. He saw a wooden stick lying beside him. Coincidentally, it was exactly the length and thickness of a sword. As soon as he saw it, he felt his mind being pricked open, and he remembered the gentle celestial sword technique he had learned in his dream. At this point, Wan Myong had grown very perplexed. Where is the cultivation he displayed when he used the lion's roar? Did he really learn the martial arts within the landscape painting? If so, why does he act like he has never learned martial arts before? Wan Myong turned away while shaking his head. As he walked away from Wu Moon, he took out the landscape painting from his sleeves. He thought that it was best if he just returned the landscape painting and left. Ah! Just then, Wu Moon's shout came from behind. You're still trying to jump at me recklessly. You can't even stay cool and realize what you lack in. Huh? As Wan Myong turned to look at Wu Moon, his eyes widened. Wan Myong watched Wu Moon pick up a crude wooden stick from the ground and run toward him with bloodshot eyes. He suddenly felt intense pressure from the boy, almost as if the latter could destroy a mountain. Indeed, Wu Moon now exuded incredible power. It had been a long while since he had last felt this way, but Wan Myong's calm was well and truly shaken as he witnessed the miraculous sight unfolding in front of his eyes. Wu Moon had actually picked up an unrefined wooden sword that someone had thrown away. When he first held it, a vivid image played in his mind. He felt as if he had reunited with an old-time friend. It was one of the gentle celestial sword's moves, Raging Storm. It was the combination of two independent techniques, Raging Wind and Heavy Rain. As soon as Wu Moon picked up the sword, the chi of the celestial sect's forbidden divine art in his Dantian One started to move. Unceasing chi coursed through his whole body and then naturally flowed to his arm. He charged at Wan Myong with a shout. He was tens, hundreds, thousands of times faster than his prior attempts. Hiya! Wan Myong looked back at Wu Moon and said something, but Wu Moon couldn't hear him. The old Taoist looked nervous and surprised, but Wu Moon couldn't see that either. Only Wu Moon, his weapon, and the gentle celestial sword existed in his world. The enormous power of the celestial sect's forbidden divine art, which Wu Moon had only practiced and cultivated in his dreams so far, surged from his body into the stick. Buzz. The wooden sword rattled hard as the energy of the forbidden divine art manifested with a brilliant golden aura that enveloped it. Check for new stories on No Veil Bin. Wan Myong stared at Wu Moon with his eyes wide open. He suddenly felt regretful for not having a sword in his hand. Damn, I guess I have no choice but to use something other than the crane-chasing dragon palm. Wan Myong activated the final level of the Amitabha Vajra divine art. Golden energy covered him, gradually thickening. Just like Wu Moon's, Wan Myong's energy manifested with a golden hue. However, it was not a sword technique. Wan Myong was reinforcing his body with a type of strengthening chi called Amitabha Vajra chi. In that state, he waited for Wu Moon's attack, holding his left hand up and his right hand down in a defensive stance. Come at me, little monster. Wan Myong could feel the force surrounding Wu Moon's sword was as fast and destructive as the wind, as pervasive and ever-changing as heavy rain. Finally, Wu Moon swung at him. Boom! As immense energy came out of the tip of his sword, Wu Moon injected the power of the celestial sect's forbidden divine arts into it with even more intensity. However, unable to withstand his power, his weapon exploded due to the violent vibration. Usually, when using a sword or any other weapon, a Mora martial artist would use their own cultivation to protect the weapon so that it would be able to withstand the stress of being infused with qi. Of course, Wu Moon lacked this basic knowledge, which meant that he couldn't stop his sword from exploding. In turn, Wan Maiyang was confident in preventing Wu Moon's first attack. However, Wu Moon's sword unexpectedly exploded, the resulting wild energy piercing through his defenses. Though Wu Moon's sword was blown apart, the raging storm's first and last wave of energy struck Wan Maiyang's left forearm directly. The result was a serious injury. Blood spurted out, a sign that an important blood vessel had been cut open. "Ah, Grandpa!" Doa exclaimed. Ignoring the wound on his left arm, Wan Maiyang drew a circle with his right hand, without even frowning once. All the fragments of the wooden sword flying around him lost their strength in midair and fell to the ground. Ugh! The fragments resulting from the explosion didn't just shoot forward. Some were also launched backward at Wu Moon's thighs and sides. Fortunately, the energy of the celestial sect's forbidden divine arts deflected them to some extent, so he didn't sustain any deep wounds. Wu Moon had been distracted due to his extreme concentration. Now that his focus had been disrupted, intense pain coursed through his entire body. Arrgh! Thick, vine-like veins covered his entire body. The pain made him collapse and roll on the ground. Arrgh! The pain was unimaginable. His muscles and blood vessels had been torn and twisted, and his bones had been split and broken. There was an explanation behind this abrupt pain. Wu Moon had learned martial arts through imagination alone. Staring at the landscape painting put him in a dreamlike state, leaving him no chance to execute the techniques physically. The only thing that he had extensively used was the dantian. Unlike other qi cultivation methods, the celestial sect's forbidden divine arts regarded a human's innermost parts as a small universe, and the practitioner could use the art based on the dantian alone. In other words, Wu Moon's physique and meridians were no different from an ordinary person's. Hence, it was only natural for his untrained body to be significantly burdened by suddenly using the forbidden divine art to the fullest. The only reason he hadn't felt the pain was that he was so tense and concentrated on attacking. As Wu Moon rolled on the ground with a painful scream, Wan Maiyang was naturally concerned and rushed over to help him. "What's wrong? Did you fall into QI deviation?" He had never felt any enmity toward Wu Moon. Seeing Wu Moon's pitiful state, he was shocked and worried. "Damn, I think I've been too mean to the poor kid." Wan Maiyang hurriedly examined Wu Moon and came to an alarming conclusion. What the hell? How can his body be so broken? It actually collapsed like this because it couldn't withstand the sudden infusion of qi? Idiot! Sit in the lotus position now. Wu Moon was in so much pain that his heart was actually no longer functioning. Even his lungs had stopped working due to the backlash. He could feel pain as he was gasping for air. Even in such a state, Wan Maiyang's voice struck Wu Moon's eardrums like a hammer and reached his mind immediately, as Wan Maiyang was amplifying his voice with the Azure Dragon cry. "I can survive if I listen to him." Instinctively coming to that realization, Wu Moon struggled into the lotus position. Wan Maiyang sat behind him in the same position and placed his palms on Wu Moon's back. "Doa, stand guard and stay alert for 2 hours," shouted Wan Maiyang. Doa nodded and urgently replied, "Yes, Grandpa." "Idiot! If you want to live, listen to me," Wan Maiyang shouted at Wu Moon. Wu Moon's blood vessels, meridians, muscles, and bones had been severely damaged, putting his life at risk. That made Wan Maiyang anxious. He regretted buying the landscape painting without Wu Moon's permission. Before he could even apologize properly, this incident had occurred. Despite being so young, Wu Moon had actually managed to use that sword technique perfectly. It was a pity to think that such an amazingly talented young man was dying before his eyes. Wan Maiyang fully devoted himself to Wu Moon's treatment, forgetting that he was also injured and blood was still flowing from his forearm. "Keep your mouth closed and endure it no matter how painful this gets. Your life is at stake, so I'm sure you'll be able to overcome this." With those words, Wan Maiyang moved his qi into his palms and transferred it into Moon. At first, He only used a bit of internal energy, out of fear that Wu Moon's internal energy and his would clash and cause a rejection. Fortunately, however, nothing like that happened. Rather, Wan Maiyong and Wu Moon's internal energies harmonized quite well, almost as if they were from the same origin. This is good. As his worries softened, Wan Maiyong started to freely infuse his internal energy and treat Wu Moon's blood vessels and meridians. However, not long after he began, Wan Maiyong felt greatly dejected. Sigh, he's gravely injured. I can save his life if I do my best, but he'll never be able to use his cultivation again. Wan Maiyong suddenly felt guilty. It was just a mistake. This wouldn't have happened if he had said, I am sorry, and just returned the landscape painting. Instead, thinking that Wu Moon was rude, Wan Maiyong had intended to teach him a lesson, but instead, this terrible accident had happened. Full of regret, Wan Maiyong decided to go to Wu Moon's parents and apologize if this process went wrong and he couldn't save Wu Moon. However, he couldn't think about that now. Sweat flowed down his forehead as he fully focused on treating Wu Moon. Nervous, Doa stood by Wan Maiyong and Wu Moon with her sword drawn, wary of her surroundings. Numerous martial artists and masters were gathering in the area due to the confrontation between the Night Spear Devil Gyeong Hong and the Palm Martial Emperor Baek Sang-woon that would be held in Go Ryang Pyong. There was no guarantee that there wouldn't be an evil group among them. It was possible that some of them harbored ill feelings toward the Kunlun sect in general and Wan Maiyong in particular. My grandfather killed a lot of evil men. At that moment, Doa swiftly swung her sword upon feeling a slight presence. Clang! 2 branches caught on her sword and fell to the ground. One was flying at DOA and the other at Wan Maiyong. Who are you? I mean, who the hell is it? The impact on her sword was heavier than she expected. If they can even put this much power in a mere twig, they're definitely at the peak realm. Ha! The little girl from the Kunlun sect is better with the sword than I thought. 4 men showed up, but she didn't know where they had appeared from. The sight of them made Doe nervous. It would have been hard enough to deal with just the one who had thrown those branches, but now 4 people had shown up. They looked at her and Wan Maiyong with burning hostility. At that moment, Doa remembered who they were. The 4 evil bandits. They were a group that committed all kinds of atrocities in Murom. About 7 years ago, Wan Maiyong and the Kunlun sect disciples had pursued them, but despite sustaining severe injuries, the bandits had managed to successfully escape. Unfortunately, they just happened to be passing by right now. Trouble really doesn't come alone. I won't be able to deal with them on my own. Doa felt hopeless and afraid. She was just a first-class martial artist, while the 4 evil bandits had already been near the peak realm 7 years ago. How dare you appear before Kunlun sect's old sect master? You're not afraid of death, are you? Doa said as she glanced at Wan Maiyong. Daehong, the head of the 4 evil bandits and the one that had thrown the branches at DOA earlier, stepped forward. Do you think you can fool me? Even a child could kill Jin Wan Maiyong in his current state. It was just as he said. Wan Maiyong couldn't move at all because he was helping the dying Wu Moon. At times like this, both of them would lose their lives if they were subjected to external shocks. The second of the 4 evil bandits gritted his teeth. We'll wash away the shame from our past by killing that damn Taoist. Ha ha ha, I'm going to have some fun with you. After the first sword of Kunlun dies, he'll twist in his grave when he sees that, said the third, looking at Doa with glistening eyes. He was well known for his debauchery. Don't you dare come near me, Doa shouted as they approached. Instead of answering, the 4 evil bandits charged at DOA. Even though they were facing a girl much younger than them, they were shameless and attacked her simultaneously. Doa couldn't stop or avoid all of their attacks. Prepared to die, she gritted her teeth and was about to swing her sword when a gust of wind blew in front of her. Clang! With a sharp rattle, all of the 4 evil bandits' swords were deflected. What the hell? Daehong roared. Powerful evil energy gathered in his chest. Looking ahead, Doa saw a man who looked to be in his late 30s. He was dressed in black, with a matching cape, and had a long spear in his hand. Going after someone in danger is already disgraceful in itself, yet you're also shameless enough to attack a little girl at the same time, the middle-aged spearman said, looking at the 4 evil bandits with an icy stare. As the saying went, Humans had to be quick-witted to live long. However, the four evil bandits couldn't pass up this opportunity. They were now in front of a very coveted prey called Jin Wan Mayong. Fucking bastard! How dare you interfere with us? Fine then, we'll kill you first. In spite of their brave words, the four evil bandits instinctively felt something unusual. They all used their best martial arts techniques simultaneously. 1. The term is loosely translated as elixir field, sea of chi, or simply energy center, and is considered the energetic core of the body. 7 years ago, the four evil bandits were defeated by Jin Wan Mayong. After their defeat, the group had trained arduously over the years and were now at the peak realm. With coordinated attacks, they struck at the spearmen at the same time. Thump! The spearman stepped forward with his right foot and swung his spear horizontally with just one hand. Bang! Bang! The four evil bandits' swords split in half and the pieces flew in all directions. What? Doa couldn't even see when the man had moved again. Identical blood-colored holes appeared on the foreheads of the bandits, and the four men collapsed to the ground with blood spraying from their heads like a fountain. Meanwhile, as Wan Mayong channeled all his qi into Song Wu Moon for treatment, he began to feel something strange. What's this? There's a strange suction force acting from inside this child. The qi flowing out of him and into Wu Moon was more than what he had intended. To put it more precisely, the qi was being sucked out of him. What in the world is going on? Just as Wan Mayong was about to pull back his qi, something more surprising happened. The pure internal energy in Wu Moon's Dantian suddenly harmonized with Wan Mayong's, and it began to circulate in search of broken blood vessels to heal. It was actually faster and more perfect than Wan Mayong's own technique. This new bout of healing qi not only helped Wu Moon's blood vessels recover, but also made them stronger and healthier than before they were broken. Coming to that realization, Wan Mayong could no longer stop. He thus boosted his qi output and pushed all of it into Wu Moon. It was a strange phenomenon. Wu Moon obviously hadn't learned the qi cultivation manual of the Kunlun sect, but he was nevertheless able to guide Wan Mayong's qi freely and absorb it as if it were his own. How? How is this possible? It's not just blending in, no. It feels as if this child is controlling my QQI. When Wan Mayong's qi started flowing in and healing his body, Wu Moon fell back into his dream, just like when he was staring at the landscape painting in the past, while still feeling the celestial sect's forbidden divine art responding to it. In his dream, he saw his own body appear in front of him, and his mind was then sucked inside that body. The first thing he noticed was the ruined blood vessels. Wu Moon felt a strong urge to fix them, and the qi he was receiving started moving around his body, following his will. Wu Moon used it and his own internal energy to travel around his bloodstream and heal his broken vessels one at a time. To be exact, he didn't heal them. Rather, using the existing ones as nourishment, he created new blood vessels. New and more active blood vessels appeared next to the old and damaged ones, eating up the fragments of the old vessels. As a result, they quickly expanded until they became larger than his previous blood vessels. He felt seemingly endless joy. It was as if everything was going his way. It was like being free from restraints, gaining true freedom, and becoming a transcendent. At that moment, Wu Moon also noticed his wrecked muscles and bones. It's my precious body. It's more important than anything else. I want to fix those too. As per his heart's desire, his qi once more started circulating around his body. This time, it shifted away from his blood vessels and penetrated the surrounding muscles and bones, building them anew. Just like what had happened with his blood vessels moments before, his muscles and bones expanded and grew by using the old and damaged ones as nourishment. The artificial metamorphosis transpired according to Wu Moon's will. Gathering enough small changes to create a miracle, Wu Moon soon achieved a perfect rebirth. Barf! Wan Mayong vomited blood as he took his hands off Wu Moon's back. The first thing he sensed was a dense smell of blood, but it actually wasn't coming from him. The ground was simply covered in blood. Doa, where are you? Here, Grandpa. Upon hearing Doa's voice, Wan Mayong's tense body relaxed a little. Only then did he get to look at his surroundings. 4 middle-aged men were lying in front of him. Who are they? Looking at their faces, he immediately realized that they were the 4 evil bandits. These wicked men successfully escaped from his pursuit 7 years ago. At that moment, Won Mayong got the gist of the situation. Doa couldn't have beaten them, which means someone intervened. There was no one around except DOA, but she was simply not at that level. The scar marks left on the corpses' foreheads were all the same size, and they had all sprayed the same amount of blood as well. It was clear that the same person had dispatched all 4 of them in a masterful display of technique. Someone killed all 4 peak experts in such a perfect way. He's got to be an absolute master. Who helped you, Doa? Was it one of the 8 heavenly martial emperors or one of the 6 rising challengers? Although Won Mayong had woken up, Doa's eyes were still full of worries since he had just vomited quite a lot of blood. Crying, Doa responded, "I asked the person who helped me for his name as he left. He called himself Gyeong Hong, the Night Spear Devil. Gyeong Hong. I owe him a lot now." Won Mayong was now in debt, but he still felt relieved. If Gyeong Hong hadn't appeared, the 4 evil bandits would have easily killed him, Doa, and Wu Moon. Fate is up to the heavens. It truly is. Oh ho, Are the heavens looking out for this child too? Wu Moon had learned a strong divine art that could absorb the Kunlun sect's qi at will. It was a mysterious martial art, which produced a kind of qi unfamiliar to even Won Mayong. The boy had also suffered injuries so grave that he nearly died, but by a stroke of luck, he had ended up healthier and stronger than before. Furthermore, as soon as he was in danger, the Night Spear Devil, Gyeong Hong, had appeared and saved them. Perhaps he really was born with heavenly luck. As he pondered about it, a bitter smile appeared on Won Mayong's face. But my cultivation has been reduced to 2/3 of what it was. To a martial arts expert, one's cultivation was the most important and was equivalent to one's life. Won Mayong didn't feel bad, however. He had come across many wonders because of this situation. Above all, he now had a great understanding of his own character. His bitter smile turned carefree and warm. It was an expression he hadn't shown before. "Well, by the way, old sect master, why isn't he waking up? Is he dead?" Doa asked. After Gyeong Hong left, Doa was still quite scared, as she had been left with no choice but to guard Wu Moon and Won Mayong alone. That was understandable. Any girl her age forced to stand still in a quiet location next to 4 corpses would have felt the same. Hence, Doa clung onto Won Mayong's arm tightly while she asked about Wu Moon's condition. She was suddenly haunted by the thought that Wu Moon would become the 5th corpse. Ho ho, he's not dead. He'll wake up soon. Double Won Mayong's words seemingly served as a wake-up signal. Wu Moon inhaled deeply, looking like he had just woken up from a wonderful dream. Opening his eyes, he found his vision clearer and more perceptive than before. His mind was also tranquil and refreshed, and he could vividly remember what he had gone through earlier. I had an idea that what I was learning from the landscape painting was martial arts. It seems I was right. What I performed earlier was indeed a martial art technique. He also remembered that the collapse had occurred due to the energy rising inside him while he was using the technique. Thinking about that life-threatening moment again brought him terrible pain. So it was that old man who helped me. "Thank you for saving me," Wu Moon told Won Mayong. Won Mayong smiled at the remark, thinking that Wu Moon had nothing to thank him for. He had shamelessly bought the valuable landscape painting, which was more precious than billions of gold taels. With only a few gold taels and a sword. And even after coming to that realization, his stubbornness had gotten the best of him, pushing him to relieve his anger by challenging his junior under the guise of checking out the latter's martial arts. That made him feel like having a considerable amount of qi taken away from him was nothing much. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect that to happen. To pay for my actions, I will return the landscape painting and compensate you as well for trying to quench my greed under the pretense of testing you." "I'm so sorry." Won Mayong apologized profusely, bowing deeply toward Wu Moon, even though the latter was much younger. Wu Moon was surprised. He hadn't expected Won Mayong to smile and apologize so easily. The elder's actions had completely erased Wu Moon's impression that Won Mayong was a bad person. "Do, how much money do you have left?" Won Mayong turned to his grand disciple. "Why? Don't tell me. I'll pay you back a lot more when we get back, so just give me what you have right now." Won Mayong handed Wu Moon the 2 gold taels he had received from DOA. You don't have to return the money I gave to your father. Just take these as well. Oh no, you saved me and made me healthier, which is already more than I could ever ask for. Your landscape painting is truly an everlasting treasure. If only you knew its true value, you'd realize the compensation I'm giving you for the greed I exhibited as a martial artist of the righteous faction, and a Taoist, too. Abandon the greed of the world really isn't all that much. Take it. You'll need it for your family, Wan Maiyong said, looking at Wu Moon profoundly. Thank you. Wu Moon bowed to Wan Maiyong as he accepted it. Wan Maiyong shook his head with a smile. No, you shouldn't thank me. All of this transpired because of my greed and stubbornness. Wan Maiyong didn't mention that he had consumed 1/3 of his cultivation to save Wu Moon. He didn't find it necessary. Then Wu Moon noticed the 4 corpses with blood oozing from their foreheads. Those people. Wan Maiyong answered his question with a sigh. They had a grudge against me, and they tried to take advantage of our vulnerabilities to get revenge, but the night-spear devil Gyong Hong killed them. Gyong Hong, one of the 2 absolute masters that were going to fight in Go Ryong Pyong, had saved them. Wu Moon felt amazed. Being indebted to such a great person in and of itself was a great feat. But you don't need to worry about that. This incident occurred because of me, so I'll repay the debt. Even though the old man tried to take full responsibility for the incident, Wu Moon thought that he had to repay Gyong Hong's kindness someday anyway. There's something I'm curious about. Is it all right if I ask you a question? Wan Maiyong inquired. Sure. Before speaking, Wan Maiyong took out the landscape painting from his robe sleeve and handed it to Wu Moon without any hesitation or longing. Who drew this landscape painting? Wu Moon was also curious about it. I don't know either. I heard from my dad that when the old man left, he said he was a member of the Celestial Sect. Wan Maiyong's eyes widened. Did you just say he's a member of the Celestial Sect? Huh? Wan Maiyong was at a loss for words. He just kept repeating, huh, and each sigh was mixed with admiration. I see. That's why he did that. Wan Maiyong kept murmuring to himself in deep thought. He muttered something along the lines of, yes, of course, that makes sense. Do you know who he was? Please tell me. I'm also quite curious, Wu Moon pleaded, full of curiosity, when Wan Maiyong showed no signs of stopping out of his musings. Only then did Wan Maiyong snap back to reality. Oh, I'm sorry. I was so surprised that I blanked out for a moment there. Child, do you know anything about Taoism? As soon as Wu Moon heard the word Taoism, he thought of the Mount Hua sect. He recalled the sorrowful memory of watching the backs of the Mount Hua sect members departing together with his younger brother. All I know is that Taoists study and pursue the Tao. Wu Moon smiled bitterly. I see. Well, it doesn't matter. What you're curious about is that landscape painting. I don't know that much about it, but I'll tell you what I know. Thank you. Do you know about the Yellow Turban Rebellion of the 3 Kingdoms period? Yes. Zhang Zhao was the Yellow Turban Rebellion leader. He also founded the movement called the Way of the Great Peace as a branch of Taoism and established the Great Peace sect. Zhang Zhao was the originator of one of the 2 main enemies that had led Han to destruction. The 2 parties were the Yellow Turban Rebellion and the 10 attendants, 1. At the time, another leading Taoist school was the 5 Pecks of Rice sect. The 5 Pecks of Rice sect. Wu Moon had heard of the Great Peace sect once or twice. They were a demonic cult that had started a rebellion at one point due to their impetuousness, but he had never heard of the 5 Pecks of Rice sect. The founder of the 5 Pecks of Rice sect is Zhang Ling, also known as Celestial Sect Master Zhang. Wu Moon's eyes sparkled. If he went by the name of Celestial Sect Master Zhang, 1, also known as the 10 Eunuchs, a group of influential eunuch officials at the imperial court of Emperor Ling in eastern Han China. Yes, the 5 Pecks of Rice sect was also called the Celestial Sect. If he said that he is a member of the Celestial Sect, then he probably meant the 5 Pecks of Rice sect. The Celestial Sect, Zhang Ling, with Celestial Master Zhang's disciple being the last known master, all martial arts of the Celestial Sect disappeared. Since then, it has existed only as a branch of Taoism under the name of Celestial Taoism, not as a martial arts sect. Haha, this is amazing. You now possess the martial arts of the Celestial Sect, which everyone thought were lost. Song Wu Moon had finally found out where his martial arts originated. So, you don't know who painted this either? No, I don't. But what I do know is that he too knows the martial arts of the Celestial Sect. I see. That's why your qi embraced mine so easily. It was the qi of the celestial Taoism, the root of Taoism itself. That's truly magnificent. The Wu Moon couldn't seem to keep the words celestial sect Zhongling out of his mind. In the meantime, Jin Wan Mayong was agonizing. What should I do? I really want him to be my disciple. Certainly, most people would have wondered whether Wu Moon had the talent, but that was a foolish question as far as Wan Mayong was concerned. The kid certainly had more than enough talent. In addition, even though he had been acting like a fool all this time, he was indeed very intelligent. As for his body, the heaven-given chance that he had stumbled upon just now had transformed his physique into the absolute ideal one for learning martial arts. Hence, it was only natural that Wan Mayong wanted to make Wu Moon his disciple. The kid didn't seem like a bad seed, and it was fate that had allowed them to meet each other. Wu Moon will become an amazing martial arts expert in the future. If that happens, wouldn't it be a great blessing for the Kunlun sect? However, it was indeed embarrassing for Wan Mayong to speak out. Accepting Wu Moon, who had learned the celestial sect's martial arts, as his own disciple would elevate Wu Moon's status far beyond what his age would warrant. There will be a lot of people who have something to say about it. Moreover, Wan Mayong thought that this desire, too, was a product of greed. After all, he wanted to raise the Kunlun sect's reputation through Wu Moon. That realization made him feel ashamed of himself again. This isn't the right time to ask him to join our sect. Perhaps if we manage to forge a relationship in the future. Nevertheless, Wan Mayong didn't give up completely. Beyond his greed for status and power was his genuine desire to make Wu Moon his disciple and teach him martial arts. Sigh. Wan Mayong looked at Wu Moon. He wanted to do something for the kid at the very least. From what I've witnessed earlier, you're skilled in chi use and sword arts, child. But you lack footwork. Wu Moon knew what chi and sword arts were. Even a little child who had no idea what the word mora meant would have been aware of those. Moreover, as he had trained his mind by visualizing the landscape painting, he had also learned the names of the arts that he was witnessing, the celestial sect's forbidden divine art, and the gentle celestial sword. What's footwork? When it came to martial arts, all ordinary people knew was that the internal energy part was called cultivation. Learning how to fight using a sword was learning a sword art, and methods of using a saber were saber arts. Since there was only one cultivation method and one sword art in the landscape painting, Wu Moon was naturally ignorant of things such as footwork. Huh. You don't even know what footwork is? I don't know what that is, but I can learn, Wu Moon thought. No, I don't, he answered with pride. Wan Mayong had an awkward expression. It was so frustrating and ridiculous that he couldn't stop himself from laughing, yet for some reason, he also felt as if he was about to weep. Did I really just get injured by a guy who doesn't even know what footwork is? A strange emotion filled Wan Mayong, but he immediately shook it off. Footwork is essentially the skill that allows you to move around while using your techniques in combat. It allows for all sorts of movements, including advances, evasion, and so forth. As a form of apology, I'll teach you footwork. Footwork, huh? Wu Moon had absolutely no idea how important footwork was at this point. However, he was certainly not the type that would refuse a gift. At the same time, the Libi Merchant Guild was in the middle of a crisis. What? What do you mean we don't have enough people? In place of her father who had fallen ill, Yon Si-hyun was practically leading the Libi Merchant Guild. Countless masters were gathering in the Goryeo Plains, and the Libi Merchant Guild was planning to head there as well to make a deal with the Bull Martial sect, one of the influential organizations in Guangdong province. However, Steward Zhang had just come over to report that they lacked manpower. If we don't want the other merchant guilds to look down on us, we have to live up to our reputation. To do that, we need at least 50 warriors, but we currently only have 30 at most. Yon Si-hyun pondered for a solution, touching her chin with her finger. A show of size is definitely important. Let's put up posters in this town and the surrounding villages to let them know we're hiring temporary workers for this business trip. Since we're running out of time, we'll pay them extra. What we need is warriors. Is our purpose to fight Steward Zhang? Well, no, it's not. Then having people who look like warriors should be enough. We can just ask the workers to pretend to be warriors. As long as we have the numbers, people will think thrice before picking a fight with us anyway. Did you memorize it all? Yes, barely. Bun Mayan was teaching Wu Moon the Divine Phantasm Step, which was considered one of the best footwork techniques in the Kunlun sect. That's good. You're really smart. I'll perform it now, so take a close look. Understood. After transmitting the theoretical part to Wu Moon be reciting the sutra 3 times, Wan Myong climbed onto the flat rock next to him. Whoosh! As he moved, the hem of his robes fluttered in the wind. Wu Moon watched Wan Myong's movements intently. For the first few moments he could follow them properly, but they almost immediately became blurry, as if some kind of fog was blocking his vision. What? Wu Moon hurriedly closed his eyes and shook his head from side to side. When he reopened his eyes, he focused once more. He could clearly see Wan Myong's movement again, but only for a moment. Just like before, Wan Myong became blurry, preventing Wu Moon from grasping his traces. At that moment, however, the energy of the celestial sect's forbidden divine arts awakened and surged toward his eyes. His vision suddenly cleared, and his mind felt refreshed. I can see it. Wan Myong's silhouette no longer faded as long as Wu Moon kept looking at him intently. Of course, as soon as Wu Moon lost concentration, the elder's movement was once more obscured by mist. That was the characteristic of the divine phantasm step that Wan Myong was now performing for his half-disciple. Since it involved an array 1, it was a difficult technique to learn and master. Not only did it allow the user to move in incomprehensible ways, but it even bewitched the viewer, obscuring their sight. Wan Myong performed it 3 times. I left my footprints here, so you'll be able to study them later. Wan Myong didn't really want to leave behind traces of his technique. However, it was unlikely to become a problem. Even if someone aside from Wu Moon saw the footprints, they were unlikely to learn anything from them without knowing the sutra. Yes, thank you. In fact, Wu Moon was disappointed. He had high expectations in learning a new martial art, thinking he'd feel the same great joy that he felt when he looked at the landscape painting and fell into a dreamlike state. Unfortunately, though gaining new knowledge gave him a little joy, it paled in comparison to the painting. When I get home, I'll hang the landscape painting on the wall and contemplate it again. While Wu Moon was deep in thought, Wan Myong called out to Doa. Doa, we should go on our way here. Bring the divine frost sword. Yes, Grandpa. Doa picked up the divine frost sword and brought it to Wan Myong. He received the sword, took out a small medallion carved from black jade from his sleeve, and gave it to Doa. Give this to him instead. What, the Kunlun friendship medallion? Yes, pass it to him and come back you quickly. Though surprised, Doa still handed it to Wu Moon. Her face flushed slightly when her hand briefly touched the boy's. The medallion made of black jade was engraved with the characters Kunlun along with the Taiji pattern. Although Wu Moon wasn't familiar with jewelry and ornaments, he understood that it was a valuable item. The divine frost sword is a treasure of the Kunlun sect and was even used by its founder. Your landscape painting was of great value, so I thought it would be all right to exchange this weapon for it, but, well, I have no reason to trade this anymore, so I'm going to take it back. I'll give you that medallion instead. Use it wisely when you get the chance, Wan Myong instructed him. I'm not going to say no, but what is it exactly? It's just a medallion that shows you are a friend of the Kunlun sect. Don't feel too much pressure receiving this. The Kunlun friendship medallion isn't that simple, murmured Doa. However, her voice was too soft for Wu Moon to hear, so he remained ignorant of the true meaning of the medallion. But please promise me one thing. What is it? Don't sell the medallion, give it to others or throw it away. Myong had just given the last Kunlun friendship medallion left in the Kunlun sect to Wu Moon, but he didn't find it wasteful. After all, nobody knew what kind of relationship could be forged in the future through this one gift. On the other hand, Wu Moon wasn't that interested in the Kunlun friendship medallion, but he would always receive what was gifted to him. That was his principle. I don't reject free stuff. You said you live in Kunlun, didn't you? If I get the chance someday, I'll visit you. All right, then we'll be going. Wan Myong and Doa left Wu Moon behind and headed for Go Ryangpyeong. As they slowly walked away, Doa looked back. Wu Moon was still standing there, lost in thought. He kept pondering about celestial Taoism and the 2 martial arts that he had learned. There were also the little things, the footwork he was taught earlier, the Night Spear Devil, One Mayong, and Doa. After taking his time to organize his thoughts, he turned around to go home, and at that moment, the face of his father flashed through his mind. He gritted his teeth. How dare he sell my landscape painting? I'll never forget this. When W. Moon returned, Song Dae Wong walked over in surprise and greeted him. Son, you're back. Don't talk to me, Wu Moon bluntly replied. And use this for Mom's medicine. I'll put it on the table. Wu Moon hung the landscape painting on the wall again. I'll let this pass just this once, so don't try to sell or throw it away again. Otherwise, I'll tell Mom everything. Also, I was told that this painting is a valuable treasure. If you're going to sell it because you don't have enough money for Mom's medicine, then at least demand a higher price for it. Dae Wong felt guilty, so he shut his mouth and simply nodded. I got it, kiddo, but what's wrong with you? You look. Dae Wong wanted to say you look like a normal person, but in the end he held it in. That was not something that a father was supposed to say to his son. Ignoring his father's remarks, Wu Moon dragged a guest chair right in front of the landscape painting, then sat still and stared at it. Time to fall back into my dream. That was the only interest Wu Moon had now. He just wanted to fall into the dream-like state again and enjoy the pleasure. Huh? Hey, son, what are you doing? You're going to turn into a fool again. Shocked, Dae Wong shook Wu Moon's shoulders. Get up, get up. You can't become a fool again. Wu Moon was trying to concentrate, but his father kept shaking and interrupting him. Oh, what are you doing? Let go of me. If you keep doing this, I'll tell Mom. Ugh. With a low groan, Dae Wong stepped back. Wu Moon continued to look at the landscape painting. But the dream didn't return that easily. Still, he didn't give up. He sat still for hours, not thinking about food or rest, gazing at the painting. However, his efforts were not rewarded, and the painting did not speak to him. Finally, late at night, Wu Moon yawned and went back to his room. I'll get some sleep first and try again tomorrow. However, the landscape painting's illusion refused to take over his mind the next day as well. What the hell am I supposed to do? What's wrong with me? Wu Moon glared at the landscape painting, glanced at it from the corner of his eye, and tried to look through it. The picture blurring in his view as his focus shifted far away. Still, nothing happened. After that, he tried standing up, laying on the floor, and running in place while keeping his eyes on it. Nothing. As another day passed, Dae Wong watched his son with frustration and anxiety pounding against his chest. Oh heavens, what if he becomes a fool again? That was Dae Wong's biggest concern now. With the money Wu Moon had received from One Mayong, they'd be able to cover Baek Jin Jin's medicine costs for a while. So, Dae Wong was now thinking of his son. Then on the third day, Wu Moon knocked his head with his fists as he stared at the landscape painting. Seeing that, Dae Wong ran and grabbed his son. What are you doing, boy? I don't care if you tell your mother that I've broken a promise. Stop it now. What do you think you are doing? Feeling his father's worried voice and warm hands, Wu Moon sighed. Let go of me. I'll stop. I'm not going to go back to being a fool, probably. The dream is completely GG1. Now that he had come out of his dream for good, Wu Moon thought that it was about time to live in reality. 1. Arrays aka formations are special arrangements of items, runes, etc. that allow energy to flow in a specific pattern, resulting in some sort of special effect. They might be meant for defense, basically magic barriers, for confusing an opponent, or even for attacking. Here, it refers to the specific stances and shifts that constitute this footwork art. Really? Are you serious? You won't act like a fool anymore? Yes, that's what I'm saying, replied Wu Moon, his tone turning grumpy without him realizing it. He was more than a bit irritated that he could not get back into the dream anymore. Wow! Dae Wong suddenly burst into an uncontrollable sob completely unbefitting of his size and age. What? Dad, what's the matter? Why are you crying? Wu Moon was taken aback. With his menacing face streaked with tears, Dae Wong replied, hearing that my son will no longer be a fool and will finally act normal. I'm just so happy. I can't hold back my tears. What? Why are you crying over something so silly? Didn't you always tell me that a real man should only cry 3 times in his life? Despite his words, Wu Moon felt the weight of his father's emotions heavy on his heart. He felt his nose prickling and tears starting to form in his eyes. He regretted his early irritation. F0LLOWW new chapters at nov.il.com. Perhaps I really was a fool to be so entranced by that landscape painting that I was oblivious to the feelings of my parents. I wasn't even a filial son. It was only at this moment that this huge realization dawned on him. Meanwhile, the people at the inn were watching Dae-woong sobbing like a child, and they were chuckling to themselves. With a choked voice, Woo-moon shouted, "What are you guys looking at? Have you never seen someone cry before?" A young boy stood before Woo-moon. He was a quiet child. Though the room was full of boisterous laughter and chatter, he was alone in the corner and did not utter a single word. He's just like my younger self. While Woo-moon was engrossed in his thoughts, someone stealthily approached him from the side and remarked, "He was such a good boy. Isn't he adorable?" The individual was none other than the old Taoist who had drawn the landscape painting and left when Woo-moon was younger. Just before Woo-moon could respond, the scene before him rapidly changed. They were now in a gloomy room. The boy was lying in bed with his eyes closed, while the old Taoist sat by his bedside. "I'm sorry, child. It seems I failed to keep my promise." Sigh. Is the solar physique really an insurmountable obstacle? The old man murmured to himself as he stared at the boy in bed. Woo-moon was watching the scene when the old Taoist suddenly disappeared and appeared next to him once more. My desire to correct a mortal's solar physique ultimately delayed my transcendence. Then images flashed by, showing season after season, year after year, failure after failure, as the old Taoist tried to cure this terrible condition. 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. He persistently labored, but his efforts bore no fruit. The solar physique was a condition of those born with extremely strong yang energy. The imbalance of yang and yin in their bodies led to fragility and ultimately caused their heart meridians to burn out by the age of 20. It was a condition so rare that only one individual was born with it every 100 years or so. Thus, many were not even aware of this condition, physicians included. Time continued to flow, and after many years of labor, all he had to show for it was his memories of watching 5 children with this condition meet their demise. It was only much later that he finally managed to create what he thought was an appropriate cultivation technique. Then, a little while after that, he met young Song Woo-moon. "That's me?" Woo-moon was now watching a younger version of himself staring blankly at the landscape painting. Suddenly, his consciousness was pulled into his younger self. He saw the celestial sex's forbidden divine art filling his body and correcting the absolute yang energy imbalance. The forbidden divine art sought infinite harmony, while the gentle celestial sword sought the power of a sword that could pierce through all things in existence. The two martial arts blended into one, taking over the meridians and taming the intense internal flames that burned his body little by little. Those flames that resisted the forbidden divine art were pierced through and extinguished by the gentle celestial sword. The flames that were burning him toward his demise were thus gradually quenched. A long time had passed, and Woo-moon's body had achieved perfect harmony by now. The old Taoist appeared before him again. "Song Woo-moon, it seems like this is the end of our encounter with each other. I sincerely congratulate you for overcoming this innate constitution you had and surpassing the age of 20. The old Taoist's gaze remained on Woo-moon as a bright smile bloomed on his face. His form then slowly disintegrated into the light and faded away. Yet, his last words echoed in Woo-moon's mind. We call it the Tao, but it is not just one path. The Tao makes no distinction between good and evil. That's why there are immortals and devil immortals, wine immortals, evil immortals, and sword immortals in this world. Regardless of what others say, do not look at the Tao in the same way that everyone else does. Follow your own path. Realize your own truth. Ah! Woo-moon's eyes snapped wide open. Despite it being a dream, everything was so vivid that he could hardly believe it was a dream. He rushed out of his room and headed for the first floor of the inn. It's gone. The moonlight faintly illuminated the scroll on the wall. However, the landscape painting that was on it just before he headed to bed was gone. All that was left in place was a blank canvas. It really wasn't a dream. Woo-moon let out a soft sigh and stared at the blank paper in front of him as he allowed his thoughts to wander. That old Taoist didn't give me that landscape painting for no reason. He had meant to transfer the two techniques to me to cure my innate constitution. Now, it finally dawned on him why the old Taoist had made his entrance in such a boisterous, dramatic, and fanciful way, descending from the skies like some legendary immortal. If the man had not done that, his father might have discarded the painting before Wu Moon could fully master the martial arts within and overcome his solar constitution. Having finished his self-reflection and making sense of the events, Wu Moon returned to his room and lay down on his bed. His thoughts started wandering once more. From tomorrow onward, I must show this new and different side of me to my parents. I must also fulfill the filial duties I couldn't until now. With this thought, he once more fell asleep, concluding this thought-provoking night. Meanwhile, atop a building opposite Dongpyeong Inn, a man in white robes, who appeared to be in his 30s, sat alone. He took another sip of wine from his jar and whispered to himself, "My dear daughter, it's truly heartwarming to see you live happily. And looking at your son growing up to be so tall and strong brings me joy." He then took another sip from his jar as the serene moonlight shone down on him. Morning came. The crowing of the first rooster startled Wu Moon awake. His body felt incredibly refreshed. This was thanks to Jin Won Myong's assistance, which had completely rejuvenated his body 3 days prior. Ever since that day, his bones had become tougher, his muscles stronger, and his sense of qi had improved significantly. However, Wu Moon himself was unaware of these changes. After all, he barely had a before to compare with since he had always been in his dreamy state. Having only worn his underwear to bed, Wu Moon got up from his bed and stretched to signal the start of the day. The well-balanced muscles throughout his body twitched a little. After finding some pants and putting them on, Wu Moon went downstairs and first headed to a stream a distance away from the inn to fetch water. This was the first time he was doing it with a clear mind, but unlike what he'd been like during his many previous trips, he was so dexterous now that he did not spill even a single drop of water as he carried the pail back. He repeated this almost 20 times, filling the large water tank at the back of the inn. Even after carrying so many buckets of water, he did not feel that this was a particularly strenuous task, and he was not even out of breath. The next task was to clean the inn. He first swept the dust off the floor with a broom and then carefully mopped every corner with a wet rag. Of course, tasks aside, he had not forgotten to take down the landscape painting, well, the blank canvas that used to be the landscape painting, and carefully put it away in his room. "What in the world were you doing? Why is everything so dirty?" Wu Moon muttered to himself as he diligently mopped the floor. Just then, he felt a presence next to him. "Huh? Oh, Mom, Mother." His frail mother, Bake Jin Jin, was watching him as she leaned against the wall. A faint smile was etched on her face. Wu Moon wiped off the beads of sweat on his forehead and rushed toward his mother. "Why did you come all the way out here? It's still early and the morning air is cold. Please go back in, Mother." His tone and way of address towards her had drastically changed. Jin Jin stared at her son's face with a gratified expression. "To see you working in your father's stead the moment the sun rose and speaking in a way that fits your age. It makes me so happy. Thank you, Wu Moon, thank you." Jin Jin then lifted a hand and gently caressed Wu Moon's cheek. Her hand was warm, but Wu Moon could feel another kind of warmth even more, a warmth that radiated from within her. He placed his hand on hers. Despite his mother's young age, her delicate hand had faint wrinkles and felt bony. Feeling his mother's hand, Wu Moon felt a piercing ache in his chest. "Now quickly get back in, or father will be worried. All right, help your mother a BBT." Her body was so light that it was heartbreaking. Even as he supported her, he could barely feel any weight. According to what he had heard, his mother used to cough a lot, but was mostly in good health when both his parents had just gotten married. However, as time passed, her health had gradually worsened, and after bearing 2 children, she had become as frail as she was now. Her declining health had also changed her personality, and he had heard that she used to be much tougher and livelier when she was in good health. He was about to leave after lying Jin Jin down on the bed, but the latter reached out and tightly grabbed his hand. She said, "I'm so happy that you have come around. Seeing you before, as a mother, Oh." Jin could not finish her sentence as tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm really such a bad person. I'm the worst, most ungrateful child ever. Wu Moon held back his tears and left the room. His father, Dae Wong, had coincidentally woken up just then, and he followed Wu Moon out. Wu Moon! Huh? You actually woke up early? When Wu Moon was in his dreamy state, he always woke up only when the sun was hanging high in the sky. As such, Dae Wong was glad that he could see his son awake at such an early time. Wu Moon turned his head to avoid having his father see his red eyes. He called out, "Father." What did you call me just now? Suddenly, Dae Wong's expression shifted. Did you just call me father? Was surprising enough that his son had woken up so early, but he had changed the way he addressed Dae Wong from dad and pops to father. I'll help with the inn from now on. Please give me all the hard tasks you can think of. That was the final blow. Dae Wong hugged his son with tears in his eyes. Ugh, you're suffocating me, let go, Wu Moon cried out. He didn't hate it though. Thank you very much, Wu Moon. Gods of heaven and earth, Jade Emperor, Buddha, thank you all. Father, let me go. I need to work now. Today Wong hugged his son, and even though time was passing by, he didn't even think about letting his child out of his embrace. Wu Moon tried to squirm his way out. Wu Moon had been learning martial arts and he was now able to circulate his qi. However, he still couldn't easily handle Dae Wong's raw strength. He tried to escape, but he was trapped. As expected, my father was born with divine power. Even though he's not a cultivator, he is incredibly strong. He thought he could escape if he used his qi to strengthen himself, but he was worried about hurting Dae Wong. What? Did you say you're going to work? That's great, my son. Dae Wong's emotions finally cleared away, and he let go of Wu Moon. Wu Moon got to work, starting by cleaning the inn. The building had always been a little messy, but once he finished the job, both Dae Wong and the cook were shocked at how pristine everything was. After cleaning up, Wu Moon's gloomy heart felt a lot better. Soon, however, boredom struck. Thinking there was nothing to do, he suddenly remembered the divine phantasm step Jin Won Mayong had taught him 3 days before. Time to study it. In the beginning, it hadn't piqued his interest, since it didn't seem as enjoyable as dreaming in front of the painting. Now that he couldn't fall into that dream anymore, however, the divine phantasm step suddenly seemed a lot more entertaining. The hardest part of working at an inn was usually the chores that had to be done in the morning. Now that he was done with everything, Wu Moon told Dae Wong that he was going out and headed to where he had last seen Jin Won Mayong. As expected, they're still here. Won Mayong's footprints were still on the massive boulder. Looking at it now, he found it truly fascinating. How can an old man like him leave such a deep footprint on a boulder? Well, might as well start. Wu Moon climbed on top of it and reflected on the divine phantasm step sutra, which he had already memorized. Afterward, he started tracing Jin Won Mayong's footprints. Thump. It was harder than he had thought, but that was only natural. Even among the best martial arts of the Kunlun sect, the divine phantasm step was considered one of the most difficult. It wasn't just a regular footwork technique, and since it involved the intricacies of an array, Wu Moon couldn't possibly perform it properly just like that when he did not even know what an array was. The sun was inching ever closer to the zenith, and Wu Moon was already on his 14th attempt. He often fell while trying to follow the footprints, but he at least managed to take 2 correct steps, which was only possible because of the changes in his body that granted him increased muscle strength and improved flexibility. All right, let's see which one of us will win in the end. Feeling competitive, he challenged himself to master the divine phantasm step. His desire for victory flared up. He repeated the sutra of the divine phantasm step in his mind and carefully guided his qi to reinforce certain acupuncture points. Taking one step at a time, he crossed his legs and moved in a direction that had seemed impossible in the beginning. He felt amazing. His qi was moving exactly as he wanted. Finally, he reached the difficult 3rd step. Great. His feet would trip against each other and his qi would get blocked at this step, resulting in failure, but this time, he actually succeeded easily. He went on to the 4th step. Thump. Wu Moon fell down, his legs entangled once more. Damn it, how do I move my feet like this? Am I practicing martial arts or acrobatics? Overcoming this failure, Wu Moon recalled Won Mayong's movements. The memory was initially blurry, but as he focused on it, it gradually became clearer. In the end, It became so crystal clear that it was as if the scene was happening again right in front of him. With extreme concentration, Wu Moon carefully examined Wan Mayong's actions. No matter how intelligent the average person was, they couldn't visualize past events as clearly and in as much detail as when they had witnessed them in person. However, Wu Moon had lived in a dream for a long time, and if anyone could be considered unrivaled in terms of visualization, that was definitely him. He continued to try, fail, and then try again until late noon, when he finally figured out what time it was. F0 LLOWW, new chapters at Nove Il Bin Com. Oh heavens! Wu Moon rushed home. Then, after helping Dae Wong during the peak hours of the restaurant, bringing in water and cleaning the inn, he returned to Wan Mayong's footprints. His training lasted until late at night, and he only stopped to eat something for dinner. Good thing the moon is bright today. Wu Moon repeatedly practiced the divine phantasm step with increasing joy. He could now take 5 steps. There was still so much left to be practiced that he couldn't see the end of it, but he was happy with his progress. If I keep practicing 1 step at a time, I'll be able to learn everything. The moon was only crescent-shaped tonight, but he could see his surroundings perfectly anyway, although that only made him think that the night was unusually bright. Immersed in the divine phantasm step training, he didn't even think about looking at the moon. Originally, he was planning to go home after training for 3 or 4 hours. But he lost track of time due to how focused he was on practicing his footwork, remembering the old Taoist movements, and repeatedly saying the sutra. Just an hour more. As a result, the thing that interrupted his training was the village bell, which rang to let people know that it was 5 in the morning. Oh damn, I didn't sleep a wink. Song Wu Moon hurried home and went to bed, but woke up in less than 2 hours and came down to the inn. His eyes were red and bloodshot, and he was sleepy and tired, but after working hard on helping with the chores in the inn, he practiced the divine phantasm step again until it was dark. On the second day, the joy of practicing the divine phantasm step mesmerized him once more, and he only returned to his senses when he heard the sound of the 5 o'clock bell. Oh shit, time went by so fast again. Wu Moon felt bad, thinking that he would be suffering due to lack of sleep. Returning to his room and lying down, he realized what he had been neglecting. Now that he thought of it, he realized that he hadn't cultivated his qi at all. Thinking that he wouldn't get much sleep anyway, even if he went to bed now, he decided to skip it altogether. Yeah, I'd rather not sleep. Waking up can be a pain, Wu Moon murmured, and began to cultivate according to the forbidden divine art. About an hour later, he opened his eyes. At that moment, he felt a very strange sensation. He wasn't sleepy, and he wasn't that tired either, even though he hadn't slept a wink. If anything, he felt as if he had slept a couple of hours and woken up. This is good. I should cultivate more when I lack sleep. Since there was still some time left before dawn, Wu Moon decided to do a couple of body exercises, which he had also started 2 days ago. Of course, he didn't use his qi for these. First, he did push-ups. He had stopped at around 200 yesterday, and he had been unable to do more. Now, however, he had gone over 300, and he could still keep going. He only stopped when he was near 400. His number of push-ups had nearly doubled in just a day because of his newly improved muscles. Not only had his muscle strength increased greatly due to the partial metamorphosis he had gone through, but their quality itself had changed, resulting in a faster increase in raw power compared to others doing the same exercise. Moreover, his blood vessels and bones had also changed. Essentially, the quality of the soil had become better, which in turn resulted in higher crop yield. On that day, Wu Moon practiced his footwork in his spare time, in between helping out at the inn. After a busy lunchtime, he went to where Night Spear Devil Yong Hong had killed the 4 evil bandits the other day. Since it's such a remote place, I'm sure those things are still. There they Song Wu Moon rushed to get the sabers lying next to the 4 evil bandits' corpses. There were 4 sabers, but they had all been split in half by one move from Yong Hong. Picking them up, Wu Moon headed to the small blacksmith shop at the village entrance. Hello, anyone here? Wu Moon entered the shop with the 4 evil bandits' broken weapons. Mr. Chu, the blacksmith, stopped working on the sickle he was making and looked at Wu Moon. He had a strong, muscular build and gave off a stubborn air. You're the son of the Song family, aren't you? What brings you here? He wiped the sweat off his face. I'd like to buy a sword. I don't have any money, but I can trade these for one. Mr. Chu felt that something was strange. Come to think of it, wasn't this guy? Indeed, not too long ago, Wu Moon had been wandering around grinning like an idiot. However, that was no longer the case. On the other hand, Mr. Chu wasn't really the kind to pay much attention to others. He wasn't really curious or surprised at how Wu Moon had stopped being a fool. Rather, he was more interested in the broken blades that the kid was holding. Well, let me see them. Wu Moon put the weapons down on the counter, and Mr. Chu's eyes shone as he examined them. These are very well made. It's a good metal too, so it'll still be valuable even if I melt it down. Really? That's great. Then I'll buy a sword in exchange. Why? With a shrug, Wu Moon voiced out the excuse he had prepared in advance. The world's becoming a mess lately, and there are a lot of evil men out there. I decided to buy a sword and carry it with me so that I can take care of myself. These days, it was common for even a merchant to carry a sword. Simple farmers in the countryside didn't have swords, but even they had bamboo spears or clubs at home. Therefore, Wu Moon's reasoning didn't sound strange. I'm sorry, we don't sell weapons here. Since it was a blacksmith shop, Wu Moon thought that they would have a few swords, which was why he was shocked to find out that there weren't any. The bigger problem was that this was the only blacksmith shop in town. So, can you make a sword instead with these blades? No, I don't make weapons, Mr. Chu flatly refused. It was a promise he had made to himself after witnessing a sword he had made with plenty of effort become a tool that killed countless people in the hands of a brutal killer. As he got older, he realized that it was the person, not the sword, that caused so much death, but he couldn't break his oath. Wu Moon was also facing a terrible dilemma of his own. He wanted to have a sword, but he obviously couldn't force the bladesmith to make him one. What do I do? The next moment, he had a wild idea. Okay, then teach me how to forge instead and let me use your tools. I'll give you these blades as payment. Mr. Chu shook his head. No. What makes you think it's that easy to smith a sword? I'll just pay for these blades with silver tails. When you get the time to go to a nearby town, you can buy a sword there. However, Wu Moon shook his head stubbornly. No, I don't want money. I just want my sword. If you can't make it, at least teach me. No, please teach me. This GGI. Not bothering to listen to him, Wu Moon insisted on what he wanted, which annoyed me, Mr. Chu. All right, go ahead. I won't lose anything anyway. The blacksmith shop wasn't that busy, since it only made agricultural tools used by the locals, which meant teaching Wu Moon wouldn't be that difficult. It was also quite clear that Wu Moon wouldn't give up and would hold out for a month in the blacksmith shop at this rate. You can start by manning the bellows. Working the bellows was the most basic of the basics in blacksmithing. Heating and softening the metal would always be the first step in forging anything, whether it was a piece of agricultural equipment or a weapon. As Wu Moon walked toward the forge, Mr. Chu called someone over. Min Sang, teach him how to use the bellows. A young man about 2 years younger than Wu Moon approached with a frown. It was Chu Min Sang, Mr. Chu's only son. Hey, why are you bothering us? Do you think blacksmithing is that easy? It wasn't a particularly pleasant tone. However, Wu Moon didn't care about it. He was just thrilled that he was getting the opportunity to make a sword himself. How do I use the bellows? What, you think you can? Just give up and stop bothering me. Hearing his son's words, Mr. Chu immediately scolded him. Min Sang, be more respectful when talking to someone older than you. Just teach him how to do it. I already gave him permission. Phew, fine, whatever. You there, watch me. Hold this lever, push and pull, and it'll blow air into the forge. You have to make sure to keep the fire under control so it only goes where the metal needs to be heated, and make sure the temperature doesn't drop. Do you understand? Min Sang's words were blunt, but his explanation was simple and understandable. That made Wu Moon realize that Min Sang was more meticulous and responsible than he had first thought. When Wu Moon grabbed the bellows handle with one hand, Min Sang tried to say he should do it with both hands, but then he stopped. I don't think this guy knows how hard it is to work the bellows, but I guess he'll find out. To attempt this with one hand. In fact, it wasn't like Wu Moon was a scrawny kid or anything like that. It was just that Mr. Chu and Min Sang's muscles had become truly massive because of their profession. Slowly, Wu Moon began to move the bellows. Wu Moon did it slowly at first. As he pushed and pulled the handle, the flames in the forge became stronger. He then operated the bellows more quickly, making the fire rage. As soon as the air went in, the flames grew bigger. He couldn't help but feel hot. This is fun. Wu Moon's eyes shone like those of a child who had just found a toy. The fire's intensity changing as he pushed and pulled the bellows handle amazed him so much that he no longer cared about Min Sang's advice and just put more and more strength into it. The fire became larger and fiercer, heating up both the forge and the entire blacksmith's shop. Huh? Min Sang had been looking at Wu Moon in contempt, but this sight made him jump in surprise. Soon, however, he regained his usual sneer. Right. Song Wu Moon probably got his strength from his father. That guy is famous for his strength. But you need much more than strength for smithing. If he keeps working the bellows like that without technique or skill, he won't be able to endure the entire process. Just like everyone else, he was aware of Wu Moon's family circumstances. Of course, what people didn't know was that with Wu Moon's chi cultivation, simply manning the bellows was far from enough to make him pass out from fatigue. As if to prove himself, Wu Moon continued to blow air vigorously. The heat in the forge grew greater and greater. What the heck is up with this guy? He's just using his strength with no skill whatsoever, so why isn't he getting tired? Min Sang was surprised. Despite his belief that Wu Moon would get tired and stop soon, the man just continued to work the bellows as if he had unlimited strength. White flames began to burst out one by one from the forge. What are you doing? Do you really think you can heat up the metal after you blow the flames everywhere like that? You have to gather all the flames in that part, Min Sang told Wu Moon, pointing at the forge. What made you think using the bellows is all about strength? Listening to Min Sang's advice, Wu Moon tried his best to steer the fire in his desired direction. But it wasn't as easy as he had thought. Eventually, Wu Moon let go and stepped back. I don't know how to do it. Show me. I told you to just give up. I'll do it once and you're free to do whatever you want after that. Since he had no work to do, Min Sang wanted to rest, not teach Wu Moon. Hence, he hoped Wu Moon would soon reach his limits and give up. Min Sang held the bellows handle and skillfully manipulated it. He exerted way more strength than Wu Moon, yet he managed to keep the flames blazing in a single spot, rarely changing locations. Wu Moon carefully watched how Min Sang moved the bellows handle, observing intently when Min Sang put more power and when he used a softer touch, when he worked hard, and when he paused a little. Watching the fire and Min Sang's movements at the same time, Wu Moon memorized all of his movements. Wu Moon's intense focus remained even as sweat dripped down Min Sang's face. Now try again, man. If you can't do this properly, then just go home. If you can't even blow the bellows, forget about making a sword. Maintaining concentration, Wu Moon went to the forge and grabbed the bellows handle. When he pushed it, air went into the forge, strengthening the fire further. He pulled and pushed again. As Wu Moon repeated these movements, Min Sang watched from behind, snorting in disdain. However, as he watched, his expression gradually changed. Huh? At first, Wu Moon had seemed incapable of controlling the fire properly, but at some point, he had actually started to show a bit of skill, though he was still nowhere as good as Min Sang. Noticing Min Sang's surprise from afar, Mr. Chu checked on Wu Moon, wondering what was going on. Huh? Is it really his first time using the bellows? Working the bellows was, in principle, the easiest thing to do in blacksmithing. All the beginner needed was strength. It was hard to keep the flames up consistently at first, but no matter how stupid they were able to do it in a few years. However, using the bellows proficiently was something else altogether, let alone doing it after only a few attempts. Yet, Wu Moon was already doing just that. More importantly, Wu Moon's eyes were burning with intense determination. In Wu Moon's head, Min Sang's way of handling the bellows earlier repeated without pause, each repetition showing more detail than the previous one. Having maintained an extreme level of concentration on the landscape painting for so long and having continuously trained his mind, he was now better than anyone else in the world at remembering what he had seen and embodying those movements accordingly. Time passed by, just like that. When Wu Moon stopped and looked back, Min Sang tried to hide his surprise. Well, using the bellows is a blacksmith's easiest task. Even I did that much in a day. Mr. Chu's eyes widened at MMN Sang's bragging. Looking at WWW Moon, he said, "That's enough bellows work. Would you like to try using the hammer?" Wu Moon's face brightened up. Learning new things was fun. "Yes, please teach me." "All right, come back tomorrow morning. It's almost dinner time. Shouldn't you help at the inn?" "Ah, I didn't notice the time. Yes, thank you." Before WW Moon knew it, the sun was already setting. He hurriedly said goodbye to Mr. Chu and ran toward the inn. As he did, he heard Min Sang shouting behind him, "Don't come tomorrow. Hammering isn't easy. You should just give up." Wu Moon simply ignored him. F0LOOWW. New chapters at Nov, Ale Bin Com. Wu Moon began helping his dad as soon as he arrived, and when night fell, he left the house and grabbed a wooden sword he had made himself. It was certainly not a work of art, but still, it was made of the hardest birch tree among the ones near the house. "I'll practice sword techniques instead of footwork today. It should be more fun." He had seen the gentle celestial sword in his dream, and his heart was already pounding at the thought of actually practicing it. Of course, he was afraid of the sword exploding like before, but his expectations were high enough to suppress that fear. Wu Moon soon arrived at his usual training grounds. Holding his wooden sword, he swung it through the air once, then just stared at it, captivated by the beauty of his own sword. For quite a while, he remained motionless, with his gaze fixed on the sword. He liked it. Perhaps wielding a sword and breathing with it was his fate. Wu Moon just stood blankly, forgetting the passage of time. An hour passed just like that. Then, he woke up from his reverie and tried the technique he had used before, Raging Storm. His chi began to circulate as he concentrated. It rose and rotated ever so naturally, according to the principles of the forbidden divine art. His shoulders, elbows, and hands followed the movements it required. Raging wind generated unpredictable destructive energy. Heavy rain created a dense black net of sword chi that expanded in all directions. Just as he had imbued the two techniques into his wooden sword and was about to merge them into one, severe pain enveloped his arm. Though he had been doing just fine up until that point, he failed to execute Raging Storm. "Ugh, what's wrong with me?" Wu Moon once again cleared his mind and tried to do the technique. However, no matter how much he tried, he couldn't reach the same level of proficiency he had shown during his duel against Jinwon Mayong the other day. By the time dawn broke, he had tried to use Raging Storm hundreds of times, but he had never once succeeded. Wu Moon realized the reason just as he saw the morning sun rising. The two techniques didn't fuse into one. He couldn't execute each technique perfectly by itself, and those imperfections meant that the two techniques clashed with each other. Both Raging Wind and Heavy Storm need to be done perfectly, don't they? For some reason, I think that's how they're supposed to be used. After spending all night frowning, Wu Moon now smiled, even though he still couldn't perform Raging Storm. He had finally found a way. "I'll practice Raging Wind and Heavy Rain individually from now on." The day passed by quickly. As the night fell, Wu Moon picked up his sword again, this time standing in a field, the crickets of bugs surrounding him. The moment the Raging Wind's image came into his mind, the wooden sword came to life. It swung sideways, executing an extremely powerful and destructive slash. Its following movements were unpredictable, and it irregularly jerked in different directions. As expected, I can actually use Raging Wind. Of course, his execution wasn't satisfactory, but the important thing was that he was able to use the technique, imperfect though it was. Wu Moon smiled. Then, he calmly lifted his wooden sword again and swung downward. One sword shadow split into two, two into four, four into eight. The countless sword shadows branched out, forming a net. Heavy Rain didn't show any destructive and unpredictable movements like Raging Wind, but its sword shadows covered such a large area and were so many that it didn't need such unpredictability. Wu Moon then thought of attempting some other techniques of the gentle celestial sword. "Huh?" He abruptly stopped, feeling both surprised and flustered. "Why can't I remember? I can't think of other techniques at all, except for Raging Storm." He had learned the gentle celestial sword after falling into that dream and staring at the landscape painting for quite a long time. It had many techniques. Raging Storm was just one of them, but for some reason, he couldn't recall any of the others. His mind was a sea of white, as if he was lost in a mist. The gentle celestial sword hid in a fog so terrible he couldn't see it no matter how much he focused his vision. It only showed the two techniques he already knew, raging wind and heavy rain, while the rest were hidden in the fog. Wu Moon agonizingly racked his brain, chasing after the gentle celestial sword in his mind as if playing tag. However, the other techniques never appeared. I can't help it. He gave up, but he didn't feel too bad. What he had learned and seen in the landscape painting reverie was the truth, and he had no doubt about that. As long as he believed in it someday, the gentle celestial sword would surely reappear before him. I should perfect these two techniques for the time being. There was still time left until 5 o'clock, so Wu Moon practiced the two techniques to perfection. After returning home, Wu Moon cultivated for a while, worked out, slept for a bit, then headed to the stream. He then returned to the inn with 2 buckets full of water suspended in a yoke. They needed water for many tasks, including cooking, drinking, bathing, and so on, so they needed quite the amount. Usually, Dae Woong or Mac Sam, the only waiter in the inn, would fetch it, but the latter had just taken some days off from the inn to go to his hometown. Yesterday, Wu Moon had decided to do the task himself, but instead of just one trip, he needed to do it twice or thrice in a row. It was more boring than he thought. I shouldn't be wasting my time fetching water. I can do it more efficiently. Making up his mind, he immediately thought of what to do. It was still too early for anyone to be up and about. As he walked along the street, his gait changed, and he started shuffling his feet and moving quickly from side to side. If anyone had been watching him, they would have been shocked. Wu Moon's figure was blurry, almost as if there was fog surrounding him as he moved. Wu Moon was using the divine phantasm step, the very footwork technique that he had learned from Jin, Wan Mayong.